Good morning, and welcome on behalf of the New Media Council of the Producers Guild of America and Radiant Images. We want to thank you all for coming out this morning for this wonderful day of deep diving into VR 360. And we want to especially thank Michael Mansouri and Nina Page for co-producing this, and all your team at Radiant for hosting this fabulous event. We're also live streaming it. And so hello to all of you who are tuning in on live stream. Welcome. I just want to go over a little bit of the housekeeping. The schedule slightly changed from the program.
What?
So just so you know, we're going to have the first panel, excuse me, at, let's see, 10:30 to 11:50. And then we'll have a quick 10-minute break and start the second panel at 12 o'clock. And that's going to run until 1, at which time we'll break for lunch from 1 to 2:30. And then after that, you're welcome to come back in, and we'll have all the tech stations set up here, and you can ask questions, explore some of the exciting new technology that's in the marketplace for this format. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-producer of this event, John Canning, who is the chair of the New Media Council. So thank you again. Have fun.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you. Yes, indeed. Welcome, everyone. And this has been a long time coming. We did promise and produce by this year that we would do a more extensive VR session, and that's what we're doing today. The goal with the New Media Council is to constantly find that new crazy thing and share it with the rest of the guild. And this is a part of it. We made sure that this was an all-guild event because we want to share the crazy things we're doing across the guild. We are being live streamed, and it is 360 live stream, so you people sitting in behind the camera, you're not really behind the camera. So just cautionary note. We sent this out to the guild, northwest, east, south. Hopefully they're out there joining us via app or on the web. Our goal is to constantly explore these new topics, dig into them. I think we put together, hopefully, a wonderful day. We do want your feedback. As Kate said, I'm the chair of the New Media Council, but I haven't met everybody. And my goal is to constantly meet the members, hear what we're doing. We basically exist as a board to serve the membership. So give the feedback, tell us what you want, tell us what we're not doing, tell us what you need more of. And this is a constant feedback loop. So with that, I want you to enjoy your day, have a lot of fun, ask a lot of questions, please do. Remember that we're going to do hands-on later on this afternoon, poke, prod. There's a number of companies, more companies than I frankly can list off the top of my head, represented here, different tech, all throughout the production life cycle, from the pre-production side, the production, the post, to the distribution side of things. Now with that, I'd like to hand it over to Michael, who's our gracious host. Michael.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Michael Mansouri. I'm co-founder of Radiant Images, and I want to say thank you very much for attending Deep Dive into 360, and also Deep Dive to the unknowns, all the possibilities, all the what ifs, and thank you for investing your time on a Saturday. And also, what I really want to thank is Kate McCallum and John Canning. Without their contribution, without them coming to us, this would not be possible. We met them last month, and before they could even utter the words PGA, Radiant, we're like, hell yeah. We want this opportunity because for Radiant, we always want to explore and share our experiences, not just in technology, but also methods, new ideas, new ways of creating in the unknowns. And let's give a big round of applause, please. Also like to thank Producers Guild of America for putting up this event for us, and all the hardworking volunteers from the Producers Guild. Thank you for all your hard work. I also want to say personally for myself, I have never in my life said the word I can't. I've never uttered it. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, I realized I have to say it. It's a self-truth that I cannot stand watching human suffering. I cannot imagine a day without the sunrise. I cannot ever imagine pulling this off without the support and love from each one of our employees. Without them, I couldn't do this. So a big round of applause to our employees. And I also want to thank every one of you guys here, because every one of you guys have a burning desire to learn more, to take the status quo and push it even further. And that's an empowerment. That's actually something that I just had an amazing experience a couple days ago. I was on a project that we're doing with NASA and JPL, and I happened to be at Command Center, and I saw a number on their wall that said 39, 311, 10. So I walked up to the gentleman at the control center. I said, what does this mean? And he said, September 5th, 1977, Voyager 1 left our planet. It went to explore the what-ifs, the unknown, the uncertainties, the things that we feel comfortable with, and left it behind. And for the past almost 40 years, next couple months will be its 40th anniversary, that it's traveled through 11 billion miles out of our solar system into other unknowns. And long after all this technology vanishes away, it'll still be exploring. And that's the true human spirit, that we're constant explorers, and we're never satisfied with the status quo, and there are few people that are constantly pushing those boundaries and taking them to the next level. So I want to thank every one of you guys for investing your time, coming here and exploring the unknowns, because frankly, most people that are working in this field, we still don't know, because as much as we learn, we realize that we cannot put this into actual words. We can't say that this is a human perspective, or virtual reality is this or that. I always tell people, VR is almost the same phase as when we had radio programming and television programming. There was two merging markets. You had radio programmers who created programming for TV. Then you had a new revolution of people that actually understood the method of exploring in television and created programming in TV. And I think that's where we're at right now. We cannot use our traditional methods in this new medium. We have to explore all the what-ifs. And in that process, we'll learn much more effective ways to impact deeper, not just wider. Thank you. So I like to keep it short and sweet, and I know we have a jam-packed day today, but I encourage you after lunch, please stop by and visit all of our tech stations. And we have technicians from all the different camera manufacturers, Radiant staff that can answer all your questions, and things that we don't know, we'll find out. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
All right. Now we're going to move on to our panel section. If my panelists are hiding out there somewhere. Panelists? Bueller? Oh, there they are. While we're bringing the panelists up, folks, there are some seats. I know some people just like standing and loitering in the back. That's fine too. You can do that. I don't care. But know that there are some seats periphery. Please don't feel like you have to just stand back there for the rest of your life. Or you can stand back there for the rest of your life. Yeah, let's get the other wire rack sound. Everybody likes it. Right there. Ooh, it's the shuffling of people that are taking me up in those chairs. All right, we're all mic'd up. All right, so we thought we would kick this off to start with a little bit about the business of this business, if you will, and start with that perspective. So bringing together some great people from a diverse set of the industry, looking at the business, the ROI, the why we're doing this, what we should be thinking about, where the money is, where the money isn't, maybe where some of the focus should be. So we've got Marcy Jastrow from, I want to make sure I get this right, you're the SVP of Immersive Media of Technicolor. We have Matt Hooper, the founding partner of IME Law. I never go anywhere without legal representation. And Christina Heller, the CEO and founder of VR Playhouse. So, what? Co-founder, sorry, right, yeah. I give you all the credit all the time, sorry. Don't tell him that, no. So with that, I'm gonna let each one of them introduce themselves and give their bios, because I always suck at reading bios, and I think most people do much better at introducing themselves. And we have a little bit of media, and then we're gonna dig into a conversation. Now remember, we're gonna talk, and we got a couple things to talk about, but then we're also gonna dig into your questions too. So don't worry, we'll get to you. So with that, Marcy, why don't you take us away? Who are you and what do you do?
Hi everyone, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. So he's right, John is correct. I am SVP of Immersive Media for Technicolor, but I also run the Technicolor Experience Center in Culver City, which just opened about 3 weeks ago. Why Technicolor? Why is Technicolor getting involved in VR and augmented reality? Well, it's because we know media and we know content probably better than most, especially emerging content. We've taken the company from a fully celluloid business for over 75 years, and then took our labs down and became a completely digital business. About 4 years ago, we started looking at immersive media when we were dealing within MPC, The Mill, Micros, Mr. X, and we started seeing a rise in pipelines of all of the different people who wanted to make immersive media VR, AR, mixed reality. I was a person that was actually looking into the medium and trying to understand it and how do you do it. So they asked me to head it up for Technicolor and oversee all the different brands within Technicolor worldwide. About a year and a half ago, we decided that we needed a lab so that we could connect all of the different businesses in Technicolor, but also do a reach out to the community. And so we built this lab that is probably the only one of its kind, where there is production, iteration, and consumption of immersive media all in one place. Why is that important? We need those feedback loops. We need to understand exactly how to build proper experiences, experiences that won't make people sick, experiences that people actually feel like they're in reality. And the only way to do that is to do fast iterations or fast POCs. So that's what we do every day at the Tech. And we also connect other people. So we have huge amounts of partnerships where we take in all different companies within immersive media. We don't believe any one company will be able to build this ecosystem, but we would like to be the connector of all of the different partnerships. So we talk to people like Intel, NVIDIA, AMD, Radiant, and try to connect it to filmmakers or VR content creators and try to get through this messiness of what immersive media kind of brings to the table.
Fantastic. Now, we do have a visual. Should we?
Sure.
I think we got it queued up. It's behind us, so it's going to be tough for us to see it. Yeah, it's your reel. Go ahead. Well, wait a minute. That's not hers. So you like things that work until it is taken. And now we'll play somebody else's reel. No, just kidding. Yeah. The Marcy's Technicolor reel? Uh-oh. Well, we lied.
No visuals.
No visuals. I have socks. We're gonna do puppets in a minute.
Just imagine.
Imagine, if you will. We'll sort that out. We'll show that in a minute. Don't worry. We'll find it. Matt?
So my name is Matthew Hooper. I'm a partner with IME Law. We founded IME because of the fact that we were working in traditional large-scale law firms in the entertainment space and realized that with how quickly the immersive market is changing and moving, we needed to have a lot of versatility, and so that was the idea behind it. Our clients have, our financier clients have financed about $400 million in film in the last 5 years. Our production clients and studio executives are responsible for $5 billion in global box office. And on the video game side of things, our creators and developers are responsible for $16 billion in global game sales, including 7 Guinness records for sales. We also did multiple SVOD, subscription video on demand, and AVOD deals, YouTube and Netflix and all those things. So we come from a traditional media background, but with virtual reality, as you're going to learn today, it is the blending of 2 different worlds. It's the blending of video game and mobile publishing and those worlds from a business perspective and console games to some extent, with film and with television and with those industries, AVOD and SVOD. And so as we walk through some of these waterfalls today and we talk about the business side of this, it's going to give us an opportunity to explain the different advantages that all of you currently have in this space. And this is the last thing I'll say about it before we move on to someone much more interesting and experienced in production. But in the VR space, the last time that content creators and producers actually had leverage to set deal precedent, if we all really think about it, was probably the advent of film. Because with television, the networks came in, they had their own media that was coming in, they were producing their own shows, their own content. When third parties came in, they were kind of subject to TV. When, if you look at film today, if you come in, you're going to have to basically go with a commercial exhibitor through a commercial distributor, and you already know what those terms are going to be. You have some leverage. Do you get a corridor if you have the right cast and the right deal? Do you have, what's your distribution fee? But all in all, it's the same thing. In VR today, and if there's one thing I leave you with today, I hope this is it. You as content creators, for the first time in probably all of our history, have the leverage, because there are a multitude of headset manufacturers, all of whom want exclusives right now. They're all vying for customers because they haven't yet figured out a great solution for porting. Now, there are companies like Across Realities and others that are working on porting across all platforms, but right now, you have the ability to set incredible windows for exclusivity, like unprecedented. If you do film deals, you have a 20-year exclusive domestic deal, right? Here, you're looking at 3 months. You have the ability to set precedent with respect to what your distribution fees look like. You have the ability to do enterprise deals with headset manufacturers that take your fees down. Instead of the typical film distribution fee, or exhibition fee, I should say, being 50% off the top or 48% off the top, you're looking at 30%, and with an enterprise deal, you're looking at 25 to 22%. Like, there is so much leverage. But if all of you in this room, who, by the way, are the leaders in this space, like the best of the best, because you're a PGA, if you don't hold tight and know what you're doing in negotiations, you're going to wind up falling into what the mobile game world fell into, which is 50% going off the top to the iOS or Android stores, and then publishers coming in and doing deals we'll talk about in a minute that will crush you, and they'll look good and they'll crush you. So I'm excited to be here, and I hope if you leave with one thing today, it's the fact that you have leverage right now. You have incredible leverage, so let's figure out ways to use it.
Hard.
Well, on that
Make me want to be a content creator.
Okay.
and I didn't even pay him to say some of
I
that.
know, that was pretty inspiring.
Awesome.
Hi,
Christina.
hi everybody. I'm Christina Heller. I'm the CEO and co-founder of VR Playhouse. VR Playhouse is a creative studio and production services company that specializes in all of the things that fall under that VR or AR umbrella. We have been around for 3 years, pretty much exactly now. We founded the company in July 2014 with the express desire, mission to make content for this new space and to figure out, how to do it and to try to stay on the top of all of the trends, both, in terms of technology and also creative practices. Over the past 3 years, we've worked on over 50 projects. We've had work shown at Sundance, Cannes, and South by Southwest. And it's been a wild ride. And it's interesting, we built the company without financing or investors because we didn't really understand how that worked at the time. Like VC and venture capital just seemed like this, strange and bizarre world. And I'm from Pennsylvania, and so we came where I was from. It was like, oh, you get a job, and then you invest that money back into the company, and then you get another job, and you just keep investing that money back into the company, and so we did that, and it was really hard. And as a result, because that was how we were building our company, we've done a really wide variety of projects. Inside VR, it was difficult to pick a niche early on because VR in itself was a niche, and so it's been cool because we've had this opportunity to try like to work on in some capacity, almost, I think, like every vertical that like people have attempted to make VR inside. And then we certainly have our favorite verticals, which for me and for Ian, my co-founder, are impact, VR that has some kind of impact. I think we're very excited about, VR in the medical space and, things like that. So, and education. So when we get an opportunity to work on those kinds of pieces, those are always the most exciting and gratifying. But every piece that's kind of come through the doors of the Playhouse has brought some kind of new creative or technical challenge that we've been excited to tackle. And I'm still here to tell the tale, and we've managed to survive.
So, as my esteemed panelists have heard me say a couple of times, and some of you who've listened to me on occasion, it is a crazy time right now. It is not a steady state industry. It is that raging river that if you jump in, you're going to be 100 meters downstream in a second. But it's also an exciting time for those folks that want to experiment, to play, to discover, and to enjoy. But I've also said, frankly, if we relied on the entertainment industry to save this medium, like 3D, we'd be in big trouble. We should just take it out back and shoot it in the head. And there are a lot of other businesses that are investing money into this area because, let's face it, if a doctor can do a surgery 5 times faster and save another life, they don't mind if the headset's a little uncomfortable, right? If you ask a consumer to watch a 2-hour movie and strap something under their head that may have an umbilical cord, maybe not so much so right now. But I'd love to get different perspectives here on where do you see the money, the energy outside the entertainment industry? Like, who cares? What kind of projects? And I know each one of you have seen different perspectives of that. So if you could just share some thoughts of, all right, well, beyond the entertainment sphere, which a lot of us are in, what is going on out there?
Well, one of the things that's kind of interesting about VR is that it's not necessarily just an end in and of itself. It's a tool. So if you ask yourself when you put on the headset, what does this tool allow you to do that you can't do in anything but this tool? And I think that we've seen a lot of interest in the enterprise space, especially in the last few months, for things like real estate, healthcare, travel, and I would also say education, because and so that's in some ways where maybe the entertainment industry has a challenge, because it's pretty entertaining to go to the movies and it's pretty entertaining to play video games. Like, we're not suffering when it comes to games and entertainment, but for things like they've done studies, like when they put the headset on people in the hospital who are maybe in a lot of pain, they've apparently, being inside an immersive experience reduces the pain by like 40%, which is equivalent to basically a pharmaceutical pill. Just the immersion and the distraction, and it takes you kind of outside of your mind and into some other place. And so those are really interesting statistics. Like that's a lot, So then also, for example, in like high-end real estate development, the ability to visualize a space and walk around a space before you've even broken ground on it, is an incredibly powerful tool that can save people money and maybe enhance and improve that process. So I think that, and then of course, we're starting to see, I would say, the very beginning footsteps of this into VR for education. Virtual field trips. What an amazing use for this technology, to take people to places, take children or people to places that they would never be able to go otherwise, and let them see for themselves what these places are really like. So those are, I think, areas where I think we're seeing a lot of interest recently. And then, of course, there is continued interest in entertainment and games, which really kicked this off. LA is the epicenter for VR, definitely in the Western Hemisphere and maybe worldwide. And I think it's because our entertainment community was like a new way to tell stories, how thrilling, how exciting, and we were the first people to like really start taking a crack at it.
We're suckers for a new toy. No offense to the people out in New York. We know you're important. We love you out there. Just remember, we're live stream. Don't insult the other coast. Matt, we're going to come to you last because I know you got a couple of slides. Marcy, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that for the first time, probably ever, so I've been in the entertainment industry now for 20 plus years, and I've seen this evolution go from standard definition to high definition, from film to digital, and it always stayed within entertainment. So whether it was episodic television or feature films, this is, I think, the first time an entire crew of filmmakers or creators can actually port to any other market adjacency, because it's all about the story. It's all about the telling of the story, the high-end image. And so when you look at that, think about architecture and how an architect can build in 3D in his headset, and then that client can walk around. And so those change orders that are happening on a daily basis when you're building something, it becomes much more cost effective because you can actually feel it and it's real. Medical, I do agree, is also, I mean, imagine if someone could simulate that surgery on a heart, know exactly where that artery is before they go in and cut you. That is exactly what is happening at USCLA Medical Center. And then if you think about education, so anything that you create, we're working with a lot of museums on storytelling and artifacts. So if you are building these assets and you're interacting with these assets in a headset, well then why wouldn't you just be able to take all of those assets and move them to education and for teaching? So the beauty of why I really got excited about this is there's two reasons. Number one, being in film and entertainment, it's not an easy business. Working with the people, it's getting older, the people are not humble, it's difficult, and it's exhausting, quite frankly. And what's really great about this community of VR content creators is that everybody is so open and willing to help. And when you have just a little bit of knowledge, because nobody knows what's going to happen with VR or AR, and if they say they do, they're wrong, because we don't know. But it's such an amazing group of people that just want to learn and are willing to do whatever they need to do to learn. And so that's why, I said, I don't want to work on that film anymore. I'd rather work on this little 3-minute POC for hospitality, because it's something different. And so it gives you guys an advantage that most people don't have. You already know a lot of the workflows. You already know a lot of the storytellers. And it actually puts the producer back in the driver's seat like never before. There's no such thing as a VR director. And you guys get to understand everything from the creation of the content all the way down to the distribution. And you are gonna touch every piece of it, including the creation. So that's why I think it's great.
Just a little reason.
I also want to just quickly say that I think the real marriage is when you take these useful applications and you merge it with great content. Like, I think just because it's in the medical space and it's for a kid in the hospital, like, that's great use of it, but you need the content to be compelling. So I think that's where there's a really interesting sort of crossover coming.
And the storytelling aspect of it. So you need that high-end image that you have to create, because remember, you're going into virtual reality, so it's got to feel real, number one. Number two, you need a good, compelling story. And you're going to have stories in every vertical that you're trying to do VR or AR in.
Right. I mean, I think, Guido from actually Nokia said it. He said 2016 was the year of because we can, right? We saw a lot of that. We saw a lot of what I call gratuitous VR 360. You're like, really? Did you really need to do that? In 2017, we're really hoping is sort of the year of because you should. But if some of you are my age and old enough to remember the birth of the World Wide Web, right? That was a crazy collaborative time, and it has always stayed that way, right? It's the number of people that have worked together that just collaborate to say we're going to make something great and we're going to create something new. That spirit I haven't felt in the entertainment industry until now. I haven't felt that spirit of people just saying, screw it, we don't know what's going on. We're just going to make this stuff as we go. We're going to work together. Hey, it's like building a barn. Like, you bring the hammers, I got the nail, you bring the lumber, let's go build a barn. That's what's going on, at least in this. It's an interesting birth of a time, and it's fun, it's crazy. Now, if you showed up and said, I want to know how to make money, I need to pivot my business, and this is the next big thing, maybe a little early for you. But if you want to get it crazy and experiment, and you know that this camera set will be the one you use today, and then tomorrow it will be completely obsolete. You're good with that? Come on and join. And I'm not kidding, right? Like it's like you see version 1 of cameras, which I haven't seen in a long time. It is that moving from film to digital moment where, you know, people were like, I can capture a high def image, a digital image. Yes, but it looks far worse than my 35 millimeter. That's okay, it's digital, it's good, right? Same thing. I mean, I've made this statement before. You know, I look at gratuitous 360 video as the sort of cat videos of the future, right? They're always fun to watch, right? Like, I will always watch that 360 camera dropped in the middle of an elephant herd and elephants wandering around. Is it telling a story? No. But boy, it's really cool. That's okay.
Well, and I would argue, as someone who has some elephant footage, that
I just teed that up.
that actually, when you are in the middle of that 360 video and the elephants come in and circle the camera, and you get to see the elephant behavior as they're trying to evaluate what the heck this camera is in the middle of the, you know, Masamara, you're like, this is actually one of the ways in which 360 video is uniquely suited, because I could never get that experience in a framed piece of content. And if I was there in person, I'd be scared for my life. And so there you go, like, that's 360 video. You know, everyone's always hating on 360 video, but like that's an example where like 360 video is uniquely amazing and perfect.
And then you have the opportunity for David Attenborough to go, watch the elephants as they circle the camera. See their curiosity.
So, Matt, I think you have a couple of slides that, you know, this is I love having Matt on a panel because he gets quick into math.
Well, and as John said, right now...
They're finding their slides.
That's fine. Right now...
Ooh, look at that. Domestic waterfall. See, like, I
go.
never show up with domestic waterfall
So,
slides. I think that's awesome.
So what John said is so correct in that right now the money in this space is, in the entertainment space, it's very, very hard to make money on a project. But because of that, you have more leverage. When there's hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, everybody is really lawyering up, and they are very, very careful at every term, every royalty, every way. As you know, the 26-page profit definitions you get from networks. I mean, no offense, John. I know.
I'm taking it.
But it's very, very carefully looked at. In VR, because of the fact that right now there isn't a ton of monetization, because of the fragmentation of headsets and also, you know, consumer adoption. But because of that, there is an opportunity to get better deal terms and make those into your precedent, because you know how big precedent is in the entertainment industry. As producers, you hear it from talent all the time, oh, but that's not their precedent. So when we look at these slides back here, the first one's just a customary domestic waterfall on a film. So how many of you produce film of the Producers Guild? I mean, all of you, right? Or television? Okay, so we have a split. Well, in the...
Wait a minute, don't, I'm, my new media peeps. New media?
That's right, new media?
See, there you go.
Absolutely, great. Yeah, well, my next set of questions was going to relate to VR specifically, and it was, how many of you have seen a 360 video in VR? Okay, a lot.
Wow, look at that.
How many of you have seen a volumetric video, meaning an 8i, hype, or Lytro video? Okay, that's impressive. And how many of you have had a game-based experience in VR? Oh, wow, okay, that's great.
Pros.
So with respect to the customary film waterfall, this is obviously, it is always subject to change, right? You have corridors, you have deferments that come in earlier, you've got different splits coming out of international, but in a customary domestic waterfall, you have your exhibitor up top. When we're talking at the theater level, you're looking at somewhere between 46 and 54% going to the exhibitor. You guys will never see that money, it's just going to the theater. And then secondarily, you either are in a corridor position with the distributor, or more customarily, you're in a fee-based position, where the distributor is taking somewhere between 10% and 25 to 30%, dependent upon whether or not they give you a minimum guarantee. And depending upon what their P&A commitment is and other factors. And then we drop into P&A recoupment and cost recoupment. And so you quickly start to see, as most of you probably know as producers, if you've done a film project, that by the time you get to the money that would normally filter into the collection account, which is the CAM up there, you're at a point where sometimes you're negative, almost always negative coming out of box office, and then you're hoping for supplemental markets if you didn't get an MG that covers a minimum guarantee that covers your problem. So then you get into, when you get into the secondary markets and supplemental markets, you've got residuals that you're paying out of the cam, right? You've got your cam fee off the top, sales agent fee, and then you're paying back your lenders. If you have a bank, obviously it's a little bit more complex because they're usually going to jump in front of the guilds and require a residual deposit. And then you have equity, and somewhere in there you have talent deferments, sometimes talent corridors, and then eventually get to profit. You guys know most of this.
I'm never going to make a film. I've just decided.
I'm telling you, that's the wrong business to be in right now.
Yeah, it's a struggle, but I just want to make sure everyone's familiar with this because a lot of producers are very frustrated with this model with good reason. And when you look at this model, right now in the world of VR, and we'll get there in a second, but you have an exhibitor that's your headset. Sometimes you're dealing directly with them. Sometimes you're doing an exclusive deal with them. And sometimes you're doing it for a 3-month exclusive. Sometimes you're doing it for a 9-month exclusive. Sometimes it's a 3-year exclusive. But it's never the film-based waterfall that you're used to seeing. Then you get into distributors. And this is where we're going to come to the next slide. So if we can switch slides, okay, great. So in the film-based world, right, the first model up there, Model 1, basically describes what you're looking at coming out of a customary distribution deal where the distributor's taking 20%. But the VR model is different because most of your standard deals right now with VR headsets are at 30%, not 50% like you pay most of your exhibitors. And mind you, obviously I know that in the film one and the domestic waterfall that not all of your exhibitors wind up actually taking 50%. You've got your VOD that's lower, you've got your Netflix, it's a straight purchase deal usually, I get all that. That's why I didn't put numbers in on the last slide. But here, you've got, if we say a 30% exhibitor fee, meaning headset fee, and then you need to get through the noise. Right now it's lovely in VR. There's not a ton of noise. You go on a headset, you aren't on like an iOS system. Remember when iOS came out and they were literally having 10,000 apps uploaded a week to iOS? And so you could go look for a game, but if you aren't on the first 10, nobody scrolled down past that. Oh, a few people, but not a lot. And so you had this thing called publishers that came in. So in the mobile game space, publishers are the equivalent of what we know in the film world as distributors. Very, very similar. They're going to put up some money, and they're going to try to push you up that chart so that more people see your game and buy your game. It's relevant to what you are doing now when you enter into VR, because VR could follow the path of games, because games are such a big driver, and because a lot of these mobile things, the Googles, the HTC, a lot of them, they get the mobile side of things, and so they have no problem having their store take 50% off the top if they can. But because there's this competition between everybody, we're looking at about like a 30%, which is also closer to customary console fees in the game industry. So you got 30% off the top and a 20% distribution fee, let's say, if you go with one of the more customary VR distributors around right now, and there aren't many of them. And that number can range greatly because you have a ton of leverage, like I said. And then you have, if you had P&A, you'd have P&A recoupment, and then you'd have some sort of costs recouped, which are unknown depending upon the project, and then money comes back. So for this model up here, we're assuming a $1 million budget for your VR piece. That is a total assumption. It could be 250, it could be way, way, way less, and it could range a lot. But we're just saying, for the purpose of doing simple math, like super simple math, 1. I know everybody's up here who knows is like rolling their, and then for P&A, which we would all know as P&A, print and advertising, or publishing spend, we're saying 500. Just again, it's just the math because you'd want to get the out there, but there isn't a lot of competition right now. And then we have what happens if you have 2 million in revenue, 3 million in revenue, and 4 million in revenue. And I want to be very honest with you, very, very, very few VR experiences hit 2 million in revenue. Very few, exactly. I count them on one hand thus far. But you have to keep in mind too that your VR audience,
But also,
right?
very, very few people are spending $1 million on a VR experience.
But
I sometimes think about like indie films and what people are willing to spend on indie films, given like the competition of that landscape and how hard it is to recoup. And yet, people spend $5 million on an indie film. We struggle to get $1 million in a place where if we made something amazing, we could totally stand out from the crowd and perhaps see a decent return on investment.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just I could have done this on a percentage basis up on the wall, but I just threw in numbers that were rounded so that it was easier to see from a, hey, this is what you do and don't want to do. So I agree with you. I could have easily put in a budget that said 250 with a publicity spend of 100, but I think the math would have been harder. But it probably would have been more realistic in that regard. So basically, when you get into the publishing model, and this is what I want everybody to see, publishers in the mobile space will often come to you and say, hey, look, we'll put money into this. We'll do an 80-20 deal until you have P&A recoupment, which is very attractive to a lot of producers used to dealing with P&A, where they're either getting zero until P&A comes back, and they're also subject to a distribution fee on top of that, or they're getting an interest charge on it as well. So when you get into the publishing deals, though, they say, okay, and this isn't every publishing deal, this is just a customary one, but you have an 80-20 split until there's P&A recoupment, and then you have a 50-50 deal thereafter. And a lot of people find that attractive, but when you look at the actual math on the board, you'll see that those numbers actually don't work to your advantage. You wind up losing more money, assuming that you have a 20% VIG on your $1 million investment. You wind up losing more money if you do an 80-20 deal with a 50-50 thereafter. And you wind up even making less money if you do an 80-20 deal with a 70-30 thereafter. So the reason why we put that math up there, and I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards that wants to, because I don't want to belabor the point, is just because something sounds good, if mobile comes in, if publishing deals come in, it's bad for producers. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. And then one final slide. The final slide deals with VR growth, Netflix growth, and a few other similar statistics. So when you look at VR growth, these are statistics from Statista, which, but IDC also has come out with stuff like this, so they're pretty much in line with what people are thinking. But you have a massive consumer adoption as expected, but as John said, nothing is predictable in this space at all. But a massive consumer adoption expected in the next year, next 2 years. But it also doesn't talk about what quality of headset are they getting. Is everybody getting free Samsung Gears, where all you can really do is some limited games? Or are we doing something more like the Vive or Intel's new solution? So there's variance there. But when you look at that up there and you look at where Netflix is at, what I wanted to just briefly talk about is the AVOD model, which is the YouTube model that everybody's accustomed to, like advertiser-based video on demand, where you have essentially a cost per meal, which means a cost the advertisers are paying for every 1,000 views, and a revenue per meal, which is what the creators are getting for every 1,000 views, and there's a difference, and that's the margin that the company that's distributing is making. But in that case, it works when you're doing a video in your living room. It doesn't really work when your production value is $250,000. It's very, very hard to recoup on that. Very few YouTube stars are YouTube stars. When you think about how many hours of video are uploaded constantly and how many, like 15 people are millionaires or what have you, it's just crazy. Like you better win the lotto. But when you look at something like a Netflix deal, I think SVOD is very interesting in this marketplace. And the reason why is because if you have 171 million consumers, as John correctly pointed out, a lot of that's enterprise-based deals. But let's say we continue that growth, right? And we get to 200 by the end of 2018. And those are not all domestic, but let's just say that's the number. There becomes a lot of options. Geolocation, which people can already do of headsets, knowing what territory you're in, which gives rise to potential for international pre-sales in the VR space, depending upon a number of factors. That's a bit more complex. But in SVOD, if you just say you're at 200 million and you have a 10% conversion, that brings you down to 20 million. And then you wind up having the same thing they charge at Netflix. Let's say $10 a month. So now all of a sudden, you're at 20 million times 10. So you've got 200 million in revenue times 12. You have 2.4 billion in annual revenue if you've got a 10% adoption rate with consumers charging $10 a month, or with the company charging $10 a month. It becomes interesting because that buys a lot of VR content. And not only a lot of VR content, but a lot of VR content at a fair price. Because right now, the numbers that are coming out of exhibitors are low, like super low, like $30,000 for a 3-month exclusive. It's not a lot of money. So I think that the SVOD model may be sustainable in this space. And then the very last thing is Valve. How many of you are familiar with Valve or Steam? Do you guys know? Oh, great. Okay. So that's a pay per use, and that can be extremely profitable as well. I'm not going to belabor the point because we've got some great panelists up here, but that's another thing we can talk about after.
So not only do I travel with legal representation, a mathematician as well. It's handy to have. But so, Christine, you're on the other side of that, right? And as we were, like $1 million, got to kill somebody for $1 million. And, you know, as you said, you know, I think your company, a founding company in the VR business, at 3 years old.
Yeah.
But I know you love impact content, but you've also seen people that are, who's paying now? What are you seeing that, you know, the dollars versus the passion projects?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, okay, when it started off, it was definitely forward-thinking brands that wanted to make sure that if it was new, they were associated with it. So things like Mountain Dew, Red Bull, that was sort of the initial thing. Especially when then YouTube and Facebook 360 came out, there was then the advertising agencies jumped on board too, because if they didn't have a 360 video in their portfolio, then they weren't also seen as cutting edge. Then we also started seeing work from new platforms and hardware manufacturers, because everybody made the thing, but what were you going to show on the thing? And so there was definitely a slew of contracts initially for content. In fact, we were the creative team for the first Lytro demo. We were the first team to ever do the light field capture, Saw Moon. VR Playhouse made that. And so that was a whole market for a little while. Then we've recently seen, and this is where I think it starts to become more interesting. So last year, VR was very hot in the VC world. I've been told this year it's blockchain. But last year, VR was very hot. And so a lot of companies raised some funds. And they have maybe an express purpose. Maybe it's location-based, like VR arcade things. Maybe they've raised a lot of money to do real estate VR or healthcare VR. And so I think we might be at the very beginning of content funds. I mean, at least those are the whisperings around the community.
Yeah, so I agree. I'm going to take it back a minute, though, because I think that we jumped way ahead to getting the money, and I want to talk a little bit about how do you even go about from the very beginning to you have an idea. How do you even get to the place where you're actually coming to Radiant, getting a camera, shooting it, and then getting it out in the world? My personal belief, so there's about 6 million headsets in the world right now. 4 million of them are Samsung Gear VRs. The other 2 are tethered high-end headsets that are called Oculus or
PlayStation or Vive.
Or PlayStation, sorry, that's a console.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really sound like a market. And the other problem is how do you get valuable feedback from people if there's only 6 million people who are able to give you feedback? And we're talking about how many people did you say that it could eventually be?
They say by 2018 it'll be 171, but who knows?
Right. So what I believe is about to happen and transpire is a deep distribution of headsets into places where people gather. And what that would look like is malls, cruise ships, airports, movie theaters, exactly. You know, you go to a movie theater, you buy a ticket for a movie, but then you can do a whole bunch of experiences. IMAX has their little place where they're saying they're making millions of dollars. So I think that that's actually where the opportunity is right now. And I think that'll be the opportunity over the next 24 months. Because as the headsets get better and less need for a huge computer to actually run the interactive experiences, I think you'll be in a place where they're moving very fast. So what I would say right now is, you know, really look at what do people in large gathering areas want to look at. So if I'm on a cruise ship and I want to go on an excursion, rather than hearing about the excursion, I can actually go shoot what it looks like to climb a mountain in Alaska or be on one of those dog sleds. That's the kind of content you're looking at right now, and I think that's the kind of content that we should be building. Studios are spending money on some content, but they don't really know. Like at first, Fox was like, okay, we're really in, we're gonna like do this great Martian thing, and it's an awesome interactive gamified experience.
And we'll release it months after the show.
Exactly. So they're trying to experiment with all of these different ways to do it. I think the one experience that was the most successful for them was the Alien VR rendered 360 piece. Why was that? Because the minute it went up on Facebook, it got well over 1 million views within the first 24 hours. So for them, that was a really good use of money for them, getting those eyeballs and keeping the alien asset alive. And so I think that there will be money flowing around for studios, but not as much money as one would think. The experiences that are the gamified experience in an interactive way in a game engine usually takes 3 to 6 months to build out a proper experience. And then by the time you get it out there, it's outdated because someone else has done something even further thinking.
Yeah.
So I think these small little proof of concepts are the easiest way to go and the most that you can learn. And that way you get them out there and people actually get to experience, which is why the festivals are so important, why the conventions are so important, and really the hardware manufacturers are paying for content. So they will give you $250,000 for a piece of content. And your job as producers is to figure out how to make something for $250,000.
I was going to say, and you're spot on, and this is the, what you hear is marketing and location-based right now, or where people are spending their money, right? Universal Pictures just did a piece for The Mummy. Again, gratuitous. I mean, it was a fun, it's a arcade-like experience, shooting zombies. Who doesn't love to shoot zombies? No offense to zombies. But it's a marketing piece, right? If you look at location-based right now, you can just think of the arcades of the 80s. Right now, what we're doing is we're able to deploy higher-end headsets, higher fidelity systems in a limited number where you can get people to try it out, and sure enough, the consumer reactions go, where can I get me some of that, right? And you're like, oh, we can't get it at home yet. But we see that as a trend, and that's certainly where people are putting money in experiences. In the commercial set, probably every car manufacturer at this point has experimented with some kind of VR experience for the same reason on the cruise ship, putting people in experiences, right? The travel industry absolutely is
And we've
exploring.
got training.
Yeah, and training, training goes into that. So you see these pockets of where people are developing these experiences and applying the storytelling techniques and applying the creative techniques. And so, there's even several folks, and we've discussed for the guild members, just so you know, we will do a whole seminar, probably 2, on location-based experiences. Because there's enough folks doing things around amusement parks, domes, you pick the number of things all across the board. Those are the kind of experiences that are going on and producing for those. All right, folks, some questions out there? Because we could probably talk amongst ourselves for the rest of the day, although I don't think I'm allowed to. All right, I saw that hand shoot up. I'm not going to ignore this side. I'm going to turn and look at you guys. You, sir. Manna's terminology question, which Matt could probably spend all day explaining all the acronyms he did, but verticals, I think, was one, right?
Just the different, verticals would mean like entertainment vertical, having the real estate vertical, the medical vertical, each meaning an industry essentially in which the technology could be used.
Yeah.
Right. So interpreting, the tech side of me says vertical, and then the content side of me says genre. Right. There you go.
Yeah, it's also referred to as a market adjacency. So something that is really very close to entertainment, using the same ideals and traditional workflows.
Yeah, we did, the jargon watch will be high and frequent during this conversation. All right. You, sir, in the back, in the red.
So what my take on it is, I still make my own film TV, so it kind of works even with those skills. And I look at this going, I'm kind of excited about the idea of
All right, I'm going to ask you to stand up because we can't hear you.
I'm kind of interested in the idea of how it transitions, how content, like building TV content. I get the kind of the instant grab of what you're film, where you're doing VR, but on a practical basis, I'm kind of thinking 5 years ahead. How do my shows or my films start to really take advantage? I don't know if there's a lot of where do you see that?
So you're talking, is this, a giant shift, or is it you're doing film and television, how does this live with this distribution, this content creation model? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I think that, if I look like CBS and that, they're finding ways to enhance my show. As a if I look at the film that I do, with Warner Brothers, they're finding ways to use it to kind of promote. But I kind of think that I'd like to view that content is content,
answer this.
I think we're
I
all
would
champing
like-
at the, yeah.
I would like to answer this.
We're gonna all dive in.
So, isn't it strange how a studio will spend $100 million on a film and they never do anything with those visual effects that they've created? Is that the craziest model ever?
Who are those
You
people?
don't even, like, it's in an archive somewhere and it never comes out. So wouldn't it be awesome if you could use those assets and reuse those assets over and over again? What if you could, in augmented reality, whatever character you made could actually be sold to consumers? So rather than buying that stuffed animal, you now have a digital character. I think that that's part of it. It's about the reuse of assets and being able to capitalize on reusing those assets.
Yeah,
And then
Go for it.
working with people, I mean, who do have a good vision for this medium, and thinking about your content and your show and saying, well, what would be an interesting VR experience companion for this show? Some, I think, lend themselves more easily to VR than others, but I mean, immersion, intimacy, getting to be there, getting to interact, like these are all really cool things. So you're not maybe gonna port your half-hour television show to a VR experience, but maybe there's one scene of it that would be really, really interesting to allow your fan to engage with, and I think that's where the like fun brainstorming begins.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Or
Go ahead.
exploring it, or what if you really wanted to create that town, like maybe area RFD? What if you wanted to go experience those stores or be a part of that set and really, you know, continue the extension of that content?
Yeah, this is, I mean, it starts where, if you look at film and television, or, you know, working in TV, and somebody is like, I'm doing a linear narrative and I want to promote the linear narrative. That's where a lot of the digital content originally started, was, hey, this was just a means to promote that linear narrative. Now we've seen the evolution that there is the derivative works, or, oh, by the way, that linear narrative is a part of a broader whole, right? And there are some folks that are starting to do content creation where they're thinking about an IP, a story, and they're saying, how do I serve this? And frankly, I can serve it in a number of different ways. I mean, Tim Kring did that when he was playing with Heroes. He wanted to make a video game. He wanted to make a TV show. He wanted to do all of these different things that were derivative works of the concept, not of a linear process. You know, so there's, it flows back and forth. There will be native to this medium that somebody says, this is the only way I can do it. What I don't love is when somebody just force-fists this medium because it was like, ooh, the sexy new cool thing. But that's called experimentation. That's fine. Everybody's going to do that, right? They're going to see what works. They're going to throw paint against the wall and see what sticks. So the interesting thing now is we're giving more tool sets to people to tell stories. You'll probably find that moment where you're like, God, I've always wanted to do it this way, but I've never been able to. Well, maybe now you can, right? You can reimagine that. And then you have the very practical aspect of who are you trying to reach, right? If you said, my requirement is that I need to reach millions and millions of people, don't do it for a headset yet. Not necessarily going to get you the best bang for your buck. If you're, I need interactivity, high fidelity, I want to try, maybe you are going to go to a headset, right? I mean, if you look at the curve, it's YouTube 360 and Facebook are over here with the highest amount of the audience.
And there's also web VR. Let's not forget.
Yeah, and
Web VR is a huge opportunity, and email me afterwards if you want to talk more about it. But I think there's a cool opportunity for advertisers there.
So, all right, so you brought the Spectre. You can't just throw that out.
Okay. Also, I
Right.
wanted to say something else. For people who are trying to build affinity to their brand, VR is a huge opportunity, because for better or for worse, they've done studies where they've proven it affects our neural pathways in the same way as an actual memory. So for example, the Wild companion experience was a really profound thing, because here I was for the first time really seeing Reese Witherspoon. I had never seen Reese Witherspoon in person. I'd only seen her on a frame on a giant screen, and then as she walks towards me and sits next to me, I feel like I'm actually seeing her for the first time, and I'm like, that's how she moves and that's how she walks. And I felt like I had an experience with her, and it's now embedded in my memory. Whereas Wild, the movie, I definitely saw it and I read the book, but I feel like it would have just kind of gone through just like all of the other movies I've seen, but the Wild VR experience like embedded that into my subconscious. And who knows, maybe we'll eventually become, desensitized to VR and it'll go through us just like movies, but that's not the case right now. Like when you have a VR experience, for even if you didn't like it, you remember it. So I think that maybe you don't get as many people, but the people you get, you make like a strong impact on. Web VR is basically taking you could do interactive 360 video inside the browser. So what's exciting about that is you can access it on any mobile device or on any Chrome, Safari, Firefox, etc. You can share it with a link, and it turns your phone into like a little VR device. And if you want to put it in a cardboard, you can do that. I don't think a lot of people know that the browser in itself can be a platform for this. And I think for the right IP, that's a huge opportunity because it's so super shareable.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking standard yet, but what we're talking is a broader deployment of set experiences that take it out of the exclusivity of a headset. And again, you know, there's sort of a slider of fidelity, if you will, that says YouTube 360, lower fidelity, slide, your audience gets smaller, and you get to the high-end headsets and the touch controllers and things like that. But what it is you're seeing a broad array of technology. And again, there are no standards set for any of this, so it is that crazy town of everybody going at it. But they're poking at it, right? And there's now ways to start reaching a much broader audience, an audience that's diverse in location, economic basis, which I think is key. Because again, if you think about, as a storyteller, who are you trying to reach and what are you trying to get them to do? And you'll make that decision in that continuum of where you are. God help us, we haven't even started talking about augmented reality, but we're going to park that one. All right, I want to take another question. You, sir.
Matt, you said there are very few VR distributors, so few that you could list them?
Yeah. Yep.
Start listing, Matt.
So I mean, you have the direct deals with the headset manufacturers, right? But then you have,
Who are the headset manufacturers?
oh gosh, okay, HTC Vive, Oculus, Rift, obviously, Samsung Gear. You've got Intel coming out with its Project Alloy. You've got, let me see, Google. Yeah, of course, Google. Qualcomm. Yeah, that's true. So you got that. You've got Jaunt within, what's one out of New York?
Little Star.
Little Star. Yep. And then on the game side, you've got Valve with its Steam platform.
PSVR.
Yeah, that's right. But I think, I mean, like we said, it's really like less than 10 right now that are doing it. So.
Yeah, and again, you know, there were people that came out, and there was like one company that was touting itself as the YouTube of 360. I did have to point out to him that eventually YouTube was going to be the YouTube of 360. Had to change that marketing slogan. Literally, I was like, that's not going to work well. So here you're seeing some folks come in strong, wanting to be the big distributors and the gather content, and you're seeing those business models shift and change. What is spectacular about this is we do have some worldwide ubiquitous distribution platforms, right? YouTube and Facebook, for the most part worldwide. There are some places that doesn't hold true. But you're seeing some worldwide distribution platforms. Maybe it's the lowest common denominator, but you can sure reach a lot of people through that, and sometimes that works really well for you. I published a series of VR pieces with the Next VR team. Can't see it everywhere. But what we did do is I did a 2D 360 piece on YouTube pointing to the higher fidelity piece. So everybody could see that, push it out wide, and then say, if you want a higher resolution, cooler thing, here it is. But I mixed and matched my publishing and my methods. So again, who we've said today, constantly changing, more companies jumping into it. But the key is understanding, are they just a headset manufacturer? Are they trying to distribute to that? Where do they fit? Some companies are branded distributors, and some companies will basically say, look, we're white label. Come talk to us. We'll set your storefront up on your own app, publish, it's your brand, right? So if you look at a Life, some of the Time Warner properties, they're using third-party software underneath the hood to distribute their content under their brand, because they're a brand and they want to be brand forward. And some folks are saying, you know what, I just want to get my stuff out. I'm not in that business. So you can start looking at those models for that. All right, another question. Ma'am.
I have a question, and maybe for Matt and Christine.
I want you to stand up.
I have to stand up?
Yeah, you do.
All right. Can I get
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
louder?
All right, yeah.
Okay. My question is regarding investment, what the financiers, thank you, are requiring in order to get that $250,000? What's the payback time period they're looking for? You know, is that structure a bit different than it is for indie filmmaking?
It's a phenomenal
Kate,
question.
Kate, can I get you to be my lovely mic?
So the question, if you couldn't hear it, was how are these things getting financed, basically? And John and Marcy both alluded to the fact that oftentimes when you see these projects financed, they're being financed through a headset manufacturer up front who cares about the project, says we want this exclusively on our platform, and we're willing to pay X to get it done, and you have to kind of get it done for that, or be creative in how you get the rest of the money. But there are a number of ways this is being done right now. With respect to films that are cause-related, you're seeing people setting up through like the Sundance Institute and the foundation there, and looking for ways to find high net worth individuals who are passionate about the subject matter that still want to have the opportunity to get the tax, the tax refundable donation, exactly, but also want to support the work. Something that I've said a few times now and I really feel strongly about is while film and television create sympathy, and they do a great job with that, VR creates empathy. Don't forget that, because when you experience it, you'll know what I mean. VR puts you in the shoes of the little girl in the bunker when a bomb goes off and it falls on her family. It changes everything. And so it's a powerful empathy machine. And so one way to go about it is to find people who are passionate about the subject matter and go that way. From a financing perspective, you also, of course, are seeing right now at least, people coming in and making straight investments, in which case it's a little bit trickier because you have a lot of disclosures there with respect to risk factors and other things so that people know that there's a high likelihood that they won't get their money back. Lenders have been very hesitant thus far to be involved in independent projects. I don't know, Marcia, I'll be curious to hear what your experience is with Technicolor, but in independent projects, that's been a challenge because of the fact that lenders usually want to lend against some form of collateral and they can't determine the value of VR projects yet. One of the things that's interesting there is the future of geolocation with headsets, and there are some distributors we talked about that we just mentioned, a couple of them, that have indicated that they are using geolocation now with respect to where they're allowing the content to be viewed, or they have the ability to restrict it on a territory by territory or country by country basis. And once I think that starts to cement, once the genre gets better known for all the reasons that Marcy and Christina and John mentioned, I think you'll start to see things shift that way because there's an opportunistic opportunity for lenders in that space eventually. But for right now, you're really seeing it either in the form of investment or donation, or you're seeing advances from headset manufacturers or distributors that are financing it. That's been my experience thus far, and we see a lot of deal flow in this space.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on dollars. When we talk about some of the distributors / headsets, they've shifted their thinking, right? And Christina, I'm sure you've had this where they came to it and said, make us that wonderful, amazing piece. We want to show off our headset. Now they're coming back and saying, that's great. Could you make a series, right? A lot of these folks are moving from the one-off demo piece to now saying, what do you have in your pipeline? Because as with any of the digital distribution, it was great when you had the one piece of content and they went, oh shit, now we need to keep feeding the beast, right? And now it's what do you got in a series? Show us something that, is there. Do you have an IP, a recognizable IP? Because as much as we love working on cool experimental things, they also know what bring eyeballs of consumers. Right.
Couple of things real fast though. One, I think Ready Player One is going to be really big for our industry. Like when that movie comes out, it's like a commercial, an amazing commercial for VR, and everyone's gonna be like, all right, how do I get into this? So I'm excited for that because I think we're going to see a big surge after that movie comes out. Also, it's what do you want to do? So you were talking about nonprofit stuff. Actually, nonprofits have found this to be very successful for fundraising. So maybe a nonprofit invests $250 in a VR experience that shows what they do, and then they raise a few million. That's a major win. I think you can convince investors on the value of a truly cool, interactive, high-end experience because, like you were saying, there's a market for location-based, and because as people do invest more in the high-end headsets, the people who are willing to spend money on a high-end headset are also going to be willing to spend money on cool experiences for those high-end headsets. And I definitely feel like high-end IP it's always awesome if you have a name brand, whether it's a movie or an actor or something like that. But what was interesting when when the Gear VR first launched, they licensed all this content with stars in it or LeBron James. But the piece that was the most popular was a piece called Gone, which was a VR native experience that just really understood the medium. It was like a mystery that used hotspots. And they were kind of surprised that this indie piece was the big favorite, but it was made by people who really understood like what makes this a fun new toy. So the real win is if you can have that kind of writing and experience building matched with maybe like a Matt Damon or something.
So we at Technicolor think that there's 6 things that are going to really make this medium pop off and actually become a viable place in our entertainment world. So the first one is user experience. The problem with most people that are getting into the headsets is they don't know how to even get into a headset. They don't know how to use the hand controllers. So you really need to have a great user experience and how you're guiding that person through the experience. Number 2, it's social. I personally like being in a headset and don't really feel the need to have to talk to anybody, but I guess other people want to be more social. A high-end image, it needs to be a high-end image. There needs to be an episodic cadence to it. And then the third, it needs to be, or the sixth, it needs to be a disruptor. So there needs to be something different about that content, something that we haven't yet seen. In addition to that, I think that at the end of the day, I fund content because I want to learn. So people come to me all the time and say, hey, you know, we have this experience. Well, how am I going to learn if I'm not playing with content? So companies like Technicolor, I'm sure Deluxe is doing it. I'm sure you're getting involved in investing in content. But I think that that's it. You have to find those companies that are passionate about wanting to be involved in VR and to learn how to even do it. Because, you know, I've done 50 experiences, she's done 50 experiences. You know, when we were first starting in near set and everybody was shooting in digital, Leon Silverman used to call it, you know, every workflow is a snowflake. Well, I can tell you right now, there isn't one experience that I've done that is the same. And so everything is a one-off. Everything is an opportunity to learn. So take advantage of that when you're out trying to sell your projects.
I'll do a quick shameless plug. I was meeting with the Film Commission from Quebec, and they pointed out to me and they said, you know what? We're the first province, and first place I've heard anywhere, they're doing a 20% discount on VR productions. I was like, really? Yeah, it's on paper. I've got it. They sent it to me. So go make your stuff in Quebec. They want you to come to Quebec. But that brings up an interesting point that for the Producers Guild, and because it's a Producers Guild event, I can go with this, which is, I said, that's fascinating, and I hope that goes away. And here's why. I hope that just becomes, instead of saying 20% specific for VR, which is great for now, right? It gets it going. But eventually, I want it just to be 20% for making stuff. And VR to become part of the, I'm going to go make something, and it's going to be amazing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to one piece of technology or another. You know, is it VR? Is it VR 360? So what we're doing in the Guild, the same thing, right? The New Media Council, you try to join the Guild today and put, I've got 10 credits in VR. Poor guy that's doing membership goes, I don't know where to put you. I got a list, it's VR. I don't. So what we're doing is trying to just say also in the Guild, you know what? VR has got a couple primary things. You plan a shoot, you create something, you distribute it, you watch it. Sounds like all the other media we're making. I love it. I want to incubate it, but I also want to make sure that as a guild, because guess what? I'm dealing with Snapchat, the same kind of thing, right? Like, it's another media form. Things get made, things get produced, legitimate media, budgets, the whole 9 yards. So what we're trying to do in the Guild is we're trying to basically broaden how we look at media forms and bringing membership in. We're looking at the things like the credits. We put together just not another committee, but more of just a working group for the VR, people that are interested and want to get involved, want to help. You know, we have things like constitutions to change and things like that to embrace these new forms, and sure enough, we're going to have to tackle those other forms. So just as a bit, just to know that that's what we're doing in the Guild to address some of this as well. And to know there are a lot of different avenues for finding funding. I think that's the key here is You know, it's the same scramble we've always done as producers, right? You can't just, money isn't falling off a truck, but there is money out there. It is for those making the amazing, if you've got an amazing idea, you know what, there are people out there that are looking for that in a lot of different venues. With that, I want to thank my panelists, which you have been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Gives you a much smaller, much more portable way to move cameras. And with this method, if you notice, we have one camera in the center and we have opposing cameras on each side. And this gives us the ability to look around. This is our OZO POV. Basically, we can put this in a POV version as well. This is Dark Corner. Dark Corner allows us to capture with a A7S Mark II. These are amazing low-light camera for cinematographers and content creators. Ability to have low-light camera in 360 is essential because a lot of times bringing lighting in is challenging. Oops. Okay. Sorry. Okay, we crashed. Okay, there's our A to Z. I like it short and fast anyways. You just want to plow through it really quickly? I'll just keep going. Absolutely. Okay, and tonight, this is very exciting. This is where new breakthroughs happen. When you have a 250-degree field of view lens, what does that mean? So our human head, when we move left to right, we're seeing 180. This is basically like your mom when you're behind her grabbing the cookie jar, she catches you, she's got eyes behind her head. This is mom, or we call HAL 9000. This actually is able to see behind itself. So now I can put this on a red helium. I can put this on Alexa Mini, and someone could come as close as possible to your camera. We actually did a fun little experiment. We put our camera inside of our refrigerator, and we had someone go in and pull the thing out, and they cross seams. We're actually right now displaying it with a Phantom Flex. So high-speed camera, 2,000 frames a second. And these are languages that we didn't have before. We always had to compromise. We had to do tricks. We had to over-crank it. The next one is Facebook. So Facebook's got four product lines. The Facebook Surround. So Facebook Surround is mostly based on their algorithm that does a computational optical full stitch. That's very important because this is the new revolution that we're getting into a much more cost-effective post solution. So before we would have to stitch all these cameras manually one by one. Now we have a mechanism that allows us to stitch this computationally. The next one is the X24. If you go back, please. The X24, the X24, go back. Okay, it doesn't go back. It just goes forward. There it is. The X24 is very similar to our OZO codecs. As you can see, we have one facing camera and multiple cameras that can render the different field of disparities. So as we walk up to subjects, we can look around and around them, look down and around them. Next one, please. Next one. Fraunhofer. Fraunhofer has a new actually it's a very old technology. This is based on Disney's Circle Vision. So if you guys remember Disney Circle Vision, they use film cameras. They position the cameras looking directly into the mirror, and that gives us a very close proximity without any seams. The only limitation is that now our field of view is very limited. This would be a great method if you're doing a cylindrical projection. So we're projecting on these walls here. We need lots of resolution. This will give you 20K resolution by 1080 though. So you don't have up and down. The next one, please. Freedom 360. Everyone on this panel and most of you guys out there have probably worked with these cameras. This was the entry point for us to experiment, make mistakes, learn from it, dust ourselves off, and move on. New camera technology is all purpose-built 360 cameras. We don't have to worry about out-of-sync cameras. We don't have to worry about cameras overheating, not getting the footage. I would say we don't recommend this method anymore because this is actually more expensive to produce and finish your product. Because even if I gave you the cameras for free and gave you $5,000 cash, in post, you would spend a lot more money trying to deal with stitching errors and all the other things. So we would highly recommend other methods going forward. Next one. GoPro. GoPro has several solutions. They have the new GoPro Omni, which is more synchronized. It's not gen lock, but it is sync. The modified GoPros are where we actually take the GoPros, modify the sensors, so we could place them in very tight spaces. We also have the GoPro Odyssey, which is a collaboration within Google as well as GoPro. This is their first series of their jump camera. This allows us to upload the footage onto a cloud, and it stitches and comes back down. So you don't have to go to infrastructure. For some of the projects, this is a great solution. Again, not one solution fits all. You have to be open to anything that's possible. Next one. This is the new version which they're announcing. They're slowly releasing these cameras. They're called the Google Jump E. These are a little bit easier to work with because they've done a little bit more programming, but it's the same method, computational stitch on a cloud. Next one. Hero 360 rides, basically the same as Freedom 360. A lot of us have experimented with these, and we don't recommend this method anymore because, again, it's very costly in post. Insta360. So Insta360 is the easiest, most economical way to actually give 360 to the masses. This is the most easy way for consumers, and we use it internally ourselves, to simply place the camera on the phone and really get 360 stream. So this does live 360 streaming. The next one is our Insta360 Pro that does computational stitch inside the camera. You don't need a post-production again because it all happens inside the camera. Next one. IndyCam. This is a two-camera system with antenna lens for very close proximity. Next, Jump One. Jump One is a true end-to-end solution provider from capture to post-production. So you utilize their solution for cloud-based stitching. So you upload your content onto their system. These cameras capture stereoscopic 3D with very good dynamic range and really good resolution. Next is Kodak. So let's move on. Sorry, no offense, I love Kodak, but not their camera. Yeah, I'm just trying to, that's it. It's all about efficiencies. Live Planet. Live Planet's a brand new camera, hasn't released yet, but this could be a great solution for some of the live events you're doing, because in-camera does a stitch. We don't need a computer. We just simply place a camera. It's got what's called an FPGA. It does a computational post stitch inside the camera. Next, Mobius 2.0. So this is our new method. We did original Mobius with our friends at Legend, and it was a lot of work in post. So this is our new method. Utilizes less cameras, and it's also camera agnostic. You could utilize any small micro cameras, and you're not locked into just GoPros anymore. Next, Nokia OZO. Nokia OZO is an amazing live broadcast as well as production camera. It's a first purpose-built 360 camera that has the back-end solution as well. So this does computational stitch. Most people also like to do the stitch themselves, but this is also a very good method. Next. Next. Sorry, just about time. Next. Next VR is also another method. They use REDs and stereoscopic. Now they went away from 360 to mostly doing 180. I'm a big advocate of 360 because I feel subconscious again. It's not about what we show, it's how people feel. And as soon as we walk into a room, we know we're in this world. And as soon as you disconnect that from the viewer, that's all they're going to think about. So next. Obsidian. This is a great camera because it's a very small form factor camera that captures stereoscopic 3D, and it has a computational post. Next. Panasonic. This is a great live streaming 360 camera. Samsung. There's many product lines from Samsung. The small one is basically like our new, how you guys use GoPros for your 2D shoots, where you have a dangerous shot, you want to place it into cameras that you're willing to take the risk, or very small form factor. These would be your GoPros in 360. The Samsung One Beyond is a 3D 360 camera, very rough, durable, mil-spec, and it does live stitch, all computational. This is Sense 9. This is another product line that Radiant developed with our in-house engineer, Kurt Lind. This is the world's most adaptive 360 rig because you can put any cameras. You guys can call us anytime and say, I need to shoot 360, and we would just ship this method to you, and you just have to connect the cables. So again, we give the tools back to the filmmakers who already know how to work with cameras. We don't have to send a VR tech. We utilize your existing film crew to use cameras they're familiar with to place them in these new methods. Next. Underwater, so we have definitely lots of solutions in underwater. Next. Volumetric. So you're going to hear this a lot. This is where we feel 360 will eventually move towards. There's a new revolution in volumetric capture, and we will show you more of this with Uncorporeal. We have a station here, but there are a lot of companies that are doing a lot of great things in volumetric. Vantrix is also a really good solution. It's a 360 by 180. This is really good resolution, great picture quality, and it's underwater, so we can have really great underwater 360 experiences. Zcam has got several product lines. The ones I'm going to go over with you guys quickly is the Zcam S1, which is a really good, purpose-built, easy to use, one-button operation, also easy back-end solution. And the Z1 Pro is just a bigger sensor with iris control. And that concludes our A to Z for camera. We also did a display, which we don't have enough time to talk about, but we'll email you guys the list of this because the display from headsets to handsets to domes, it's enormous. We have CNN, we have ABC, we have Little Star, we have John, we have so many distribution models. We are also creating content for massive, massive domes, from Vertex that has a dome, to personal small domes, to even larger domes that are a couple 100,000 square feet of dome experiences. So you walk into venues that it's entirely a new world brought into. So we'll share that with you guys on our website, or we'll email you guys our display. We just don't have enough time. So I want to start our panel, and I want to thank all panelists. So I'd like to introduce, starting with Sam, if you wouldn't mind playing some of Sam's work. We'll just show some of Sam's work.
How far would you go for the things you love? How far would you venture out? Would you climb a hill for the things you love, to see them in their homes? Would you brave the wild for the loves you love, to feel them in your bones? Will you cross the seas to see new things? The light, the dark, the dirt. Would you capture them and bring them home, to see what home is worth? How far would you go for the sun you love, beating on the sand? Would you dive deep down into the depths of a stranger's land? How far would you go for the things you love, the things that make you wise? Would you travel back into the past, someone else's eyes? How far would you go for the things you love? How far would you venture out?
That's Sam Smith, constant collaborator with Radiant Images, always pushes us for new possibilities. Also, one of our greatest friends, we have Andrew Shulkin, who's an amazing cinematographer. We'll show you some of his work. So I'd like to also introduce you to Tim Johnson from Legend. Legend VR has been a pioneer in experimenting new methods with us. We're always working with him on what ifs. What if we could do this? So we did several projects with him. This is one of the recent. And I'd like to introduce you to my friend Jeff Nicholas. He has been part of Radiant's first collaboration. We've done all the GoPro experiments, and now we're doing a lot more very interesting projects with each other. So these are some of his work.
Major Lazer, we love this country and every single thing that we do is for you guys, okay? So if you love Major Lazer like how much we love you, let me see those hands in the air. I want to see you clap with me.
In Jamaica, you feel the dancehall culture everywhere. From the street dance halls where the selectors play the sounds, to the legendary studios where the music's being created.
And we're ready for the dancehall to kill any sound.
It all shapes the Major Lazer sound.
There is a lovely cycle that happens with Major Lazer that have been influenced from the real dancehall culture that has been shaped by Major Lazer, who has been shaped by the original dancehall culture. So that's a wonderful circle that dancehall and reggae have.
What Walsh says is that we try to make the party bigger by making the world smaller.
Try to make the world smaller by making the party bigger.
That's why we let Walsh say it.
Yeah. Everybody jump, jump!
Every time Jeff comes back with real content, it always surprises us because he does things that we even think it's impossible. The camera movements, creating new languages, and if you ever want to piss off Jeff, tell him he can't do something. But I think it goes for all of our panelists. Everyone that sits in this chair have really pushed boundaries beyond even our expectations, and we're always pushing the boundaries. Our next panelist is Jen Dong. She is constantly working, so we haven't had a chance to get her reel yet. She's been a constant project, but
It's floating.
it's floating. So what we're going to do is after this event, we'll have on headsets. Everyone's content is ready to be viewed with our friends from Two-Bit Circus. So we have them on headsets. You guys can view all of it in a headset.
You probably won't see mine, but I swear I've done the work.
No, we're going to load it on there. So yeah. So for people who are not familiar with what Radiant does, we're just going to give you a quick glimpse of a 1-minute trailer of what we work on.
We really are writing the rules from the beginning here. Yeah, we're taking some of traditional, video and film, and we're taking some of theater, but at the same time, we're creating a whole new language. Are there new camera systems that we can use that will help tell the story better? Is there a way to frame the story that we're telling with new technologies in VR that will help drive it? It's been really amazing working with Radiant. They bring a lot of experience to the table and a lot of understanding of what we're trying to do, and then also a bunch of research from all the new technology that they're bringing in-house. I mean, look, Radiant has become a hub of VR. You've got everybody coming in here, working on projects, and it ends up being this really collaborative place.
Thank you. So normally on a traditional 2D panel, I would start from concept to distribution. Because we're working in new tech and everything is disturbed technology, I would actually flip the script. We would want to start from distribution because distribution now and post-production is a new way for us to think about how to solve. We can't force the camera technology. It has, as I said earlier, has a lot less to do with camera technology than it does with methods. So I'd like to start with Jeff. Jeff has Jeff has been a constant collaborator with us on a lot of these projects. So my question to you, for new content creators that are creating this, what is the distribution models? How can producers get their content? How can content creators get their content out?
Yeah, it's really interesting. This particular piece of the conversation has changed quite a bit, even over the last 6 months, right? Some of the early, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we were talking about creating content that was going to go in a headset that very few people could actually see. Now, when we're talking about cinematic VR, and I'll preface by saying my response here is going to be around cinematic VR, whether that's monoscopic or stereoscopic. I'm not really going to talk about interactive or games. So that's just an important distinction. That cinematic VR content can now be seen by essentially everyone in the world. Let me just say that again. It can be seen by everyone in the world in some way. And that's a big driver when you're talking about, from the producer standpoint, from the funding standpoint. It's not to say that, many experiences that we create are geared towards the headset. And you want that experience to be in the headset, to be viewed in the way that the content creator really has imagined it, and to kind of transport you in the way that you want that content to do. There's a lot of talk about empathy. I think there's more complex emotions than just empathy. But those emotions are spurred through that headset viewing. There are a lot of headsets in the market. It's not the type of scale that anyone would, really pay for at this point in time. But it's tens of millions at this point. There's probably 12, 15, the numbers range. Headsets, true headsets in the market, whether it's Samsung Gear VR, Daydream, Oculus, HTC Vive, all of these different mechanisms for viewing this content. But this content, if created correctly, or if alternate versions of it are created, can exist within any 360 platform available now. And those 360 platforms are YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, for some ads, if you have the right relationship with them, are doing 360 as well. That content, it has to be different. There's a different way that 360 content is viewed in order to get the message across, because now all of a sudden you're using your phone or you're using the desktop to scroll, and something that happens sort of in your periphery goes unnoticed. But you can still reach everyone pretty much on the planet at this point.
Question for you, Tim. As a producer, how do you prepare yourself for 360? How do you take your traditional 2D producing, go into 360, as well as post-production?
Yeah, so with and again, I'm speaking as well about the 360 video experience more than the interactives, more than the volumetric capture, because that's a whole different conversation on the post end of things. But for capture, for 360 video, it's similar, but just an order of magnitude more complex, right? Every single frame is a VFX frame. That's the first thing to know. Every single frame, even if it's 2 lenses or 22 lenses, you're taking all of those different images, and we call it stitching, but you're melting them into one single image. So every single frame is already a VFX frame before you've added any CG, before you've added any additionals, any wire removals or cleanups or anything else, any beauty work, anything. It's already a VFX shot. So the first thing that we ask, there's 2 questions that we ask every client that comes through the door. Number one, don't take this the wrong way, but why VR for this project? What's motivating the VR aspect of it? If it's nothing more than just for the kitsch factor, great. At least we know, we can understand what's motivating the decision to go VR for this project. But it changes everything about the dynamics of the storytelling, what the language is, what the technology is, what the right approach is, what the pipeline is, what the volume of data you're looking at is. It's massive differences in that regard. In terms of the steps, it's very similar to traditional producing. You're just having to look at every single shot as its own, somebody said earlier, special snowflake, right? Like every single shot has to have its own treatment, its own plan, its own workflow, its own approach. Yeah, so that's the question number one is why VR, and question number two is like how do we do this in a way that puts as much on the screen as possible? How do we make this as efficient as possible under the circumstances? Andrew and I did a job last year together where the client approached us about shooting on GoPro, and we said if we change these two things in the scripts, we can shoot this on Reds, and we'll just shoot it nodally, and then we can actually stitch together, instead of multiple cameras with a single take, we'll do single camera with multiple takes to get each of the 4 different quadrants, and you'll end up with Red quality footage instead of GoPro, and it's a totally different approach, but it's a pretty minor change in the script. So these are the kinds of things that we have to think about. My second recommendation, always come to somebody that actually knows how to navigate the space, and bring them on set. We recommend sending out a VR VFX supervisor on every single show that we work on if it comes to us before the physical productions happened, because we can tell you, hey, with the rig that we're using for this particular shot, if you just push action back by about 3 feet, you'll save $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in post. You good with that? Are we cool? and in that way, we can actually really help you put as much on the screen as possible.
How does the distribution affect that also? Is that a major effect?
It's a major effect, and it's probably the third question that we ask is what's not just distribution, but what's your exhibition? What's your plan for exhibition? We talk a lot about graceful decay internally, and how do you do the highest quality project that's only going to be on so many headsets, and then have it gracefully decay all the way down to whether it's web VR, whether it's iOS ARKit, or whatever that bottom level is. What's your plan for how to get this both at the highest level possible and at the widest distribution possible?
Also, the language changes. So let's pretend we were capturing a bee. On a headset, that bee is going to look very menacing and scary. But on a handset away from us, it's going to feel like a little dot. So the language changes a lot too. Next question is for Andrew. Andrew, so how do you step from 2D traditional into 360? What methods, what approach have you used in capturing 360?
It's exactly the same. No different. No, but the truth is what I try and do, I think because it's such a new world and there's so many kind of new things you have to think about, from data to your post to delivery to who's going to watch it. I think that what makes the most sense and what I've found success in is trying to kind of click into the things that we know. So crew, cameras, delivery format. We're delivering, what does our master look like? What does color correction look like? And the more that we click into that, because the more that we click into that, the better that final product is. Everyone understands what it looks like throughout the whole pipeline, and I'll jump in another direction for a second to say that a problem that's happening in the market is that there aren't enough people like you guys that are working in the space. So people are coming at it fresh without basically reinventing the wheel, and without coming to this format, which is really just kind of an extension of our field of view. You're just taking the rectangle and making it bigger. And with that perspective, if we kind of bring everything that we've been doing for the last 100 years, I think it makes it more seamless for everybody.
As a producer, what does the crew size look like when you're shooting 360? Is it about the same? Is it bigger? How do you crew up for 360?
It depends. I mean, in general, I like to keep the same thing, or we have a first who's kind of like the camera technician, a second who's supporting that camera and a DIT. I mean, inevitably, and some of our guys are out here, inevitably the data is such a big thing, so big that a lot of times what we'll do is have an asset manager who will come and take over from the DIT at night so that they can be transcoding, because if we're shooting red or we're shooting a format where we have to deliver something that's in a different, that's not ProRes or that's not GoPros, it's always something that we have to transcode. So on this last job, we were doing this Verizon job, we had to have a fiber link, so someone was uploading all night. We were uploading jump material and some other footage, and so it kind of depends, but the idea is you click into the same system. If you're moving the camera, if we have a helicopter, we have some kind of camera stabilization, that adds an additional technician, but in general, it's kind of operator for a second, DIT.
Thank you. And for you, Jen, as a director, how do you prepare yourself for 360? What methods? How do you create the stories in 360?
Yeah, so I think you lay your parameters of like, okay, I know it's being distributed on this, and are you working on an original project, or are you working on a funded project? But I think it's also acknowledging that, VR and 360, and I encapsulate it all on a spectrum of interactivity, but it's really a medium rooted in our humanity, and taking that into consideration, it's a medium that as creators we have to think now more than ever about the psychological impacts of what we're doing. If you put a 360 camera in a small white room with no windows, you're going to feel really claustrophobic. How does that contribute to your story? So when I am working on stories or concepts, for me it all starts with the feeling of what do I want my viewer to feel, and then starting to build my story outside of that. One of the things that was mentioned earlier on the panel was, well, why VR? Why are you shooting in 360? And I no offense, I think it's a stupid question. Because if you do 360 properly, it wouldn't exist in any other format in the same way. It's just one of those things. So I know when you go in and you start with, my main thematic emotional concept is this, and this is how I want people to feel, and I want them to feel this arc. And when you start thinking about the arc, then you can start building out your story completely around that, whether it's an advertising experience, a music video, a documentary, those things are all relevant. So for me, I always say it depends on creative, but it starts with that feeling that you want people to have. Does that make sense?
Yes. And Sam, for you, as a director, what do you think is currently missing in 360?
Missing, it's a good question. I think it's constantly adapting and changing, and it feels like more and more things are starting to blend between what I guess we're calling cinematic 360 and then games, and like trying to blend those two together. I see a lot of projects that call for interactivity and 360, and there's a million formats. So they want to extrapolate for Snapchat. They want to create something for Instagram, Snapchat, a headset, Facebook, all of that. So I think just trying to figure out a way to make something work for all of those platforms is like a pretty big challenge. But something I try to do in all of my projects is rehearse a lot. I feel like whenever you shoot 360, the more you can rehearse, the better it's going to be, because in traditional media, I end up, I shoot for probably like an hour and I rehearse for 30 minutes. In 360, I rehearse for 3 hours and I shoot for 15 minutes. So the balance is just totally tipped.
Good. That's a good point. So all of our panelists here, you guys have all worked in the new stage of virtual reality since 2014. What tool sets would you say have been the major breakthroughs for you guys? Or methods? Forget about tools. What methods or tool sets would you say are the major breakthroughs? Starting with Jeff.
Monitoring. I mean, seriously, like anybody on this panel or anybody out there who's shot 360 or VR prior to there being a real effective way to monitor, it was like, it's like shooting on film. and having no sense of what is actually in your shot, even more so because you were hiding behind a rock and just hoping that things were working out. So that was really, really fucking challenging. And I mean, we laugh about it now, but what it did is anybody who was shooting around that time when we were dealing with GoPros and experimenting and had no monitors, all of a sudden you got a really good feel. And there came this point where, you could walk on set and you could place the camera and you would know, you could go hide behind that rock and know you were gonna get a great shot by the feel and by the proximity and everything. So I think that gave everyone in that world a really big leg up because you didn't rely on the monitor. That was huge. I think also too, camera technology, I agree with one of the earlier mentions that the cameras in a lot of ways don't matter, but in a lot of ways they do, in the same way like lensing matters, right? Like when I take the dark corner rig out, for example, I can now go into a much darker environment than I was, prior to that rig existing. Now, if I take out an OXA that has, ARIs in it or reds in it, it changes the game. So I think what's happened is like the professionalization of the tool set and the purpose-built stuff has created this world for the content creator to focus on experimentation in story and content rather than having to experiment in technology. I mean, experimentation in technology is still key, but you're not having to try to figure out what tool to use. You can go and say, here's a tool that would work well for this. Cool, check that box, and now how does my story wrap around the emotion I'm trying to tell? I also think pre-planning, like when not about like how it's developed, but it was mentioned previously, pre-planning on these shoots. I mean, talk about shooting boards for a commercial. I mean, it's like next level. If you don't walk on set with those boards and with a real understanding, I mean, and boards is a weird term too for 360, by the way.
How do you do boards in 360?
It's not a fucking board, it's a world. But the reality is like we're having to borrow some of the language, right? And if you don't have those quote unquote boards and you don't have that thought behind it, run and gun is like, there's like a 5% chance it's gonna work in this format. Whereas you might, like it's like 50-50 in traditional and run and gun. Here, it's like 5%. Good luck.
Same question for you, Tim.
Yeah, for us, a couple things. It's a very collaborative space right now. We've called it, for the last year or so, we've called it the covered wagon stage of VR. So things are very much developing. We're all trying to survive together. I'm sure that at some point it will become incredibly competitive. There is already a competitive edge to the space, but it's still very collaborative. And when we have a question on the physical production side, we call up someone like Michael and say, hey, tell us how the cameras work and how this is gonna go and which one would be the right selection for this particular project and this particular scenario. And Michael and the Radiant team are really fantastic about just, let's have a conversation. The second piece that has most affected us probably is the algorithmic stitch. We've done a ton of business doing fine stitch, doing that 100% super fine stitch. Legend is a VFX company. We specialize in 3D conversion. We specialize in traditional 2D visual effects, and now in the VR space as well. And that last 10% for that fine stitch is about 90% of our time and therefore of our cost. And we're still doing as much of that as the market will allow for, but the cameras do, I'd say 80% of the job, kind of on average, some of them a little better than others, but it's taken a huge percentage of the cost off the table for the producers so that they can put that into more interesting aspects of the image. Adding CG, adding visual effects, adding more physical production cost because they're not spending so much to have people like my team do a detailed fine stitch. And that's been great for us in a lot of ways because it is a very manual process and we would much rather be doing more interesting things as well with those dollars from a visual effects standpoint.
Great point. And how about for you, Andrew?
I mean, the idea of monitoring and computational stitch are the two big ones. It's to put a fine point on it. I mean, the issue with monitoring, the cameras still really don't. Most cameras don't really have a monitoring option. So you end up using a rangefinder kind of version where you plop a Samsung 360 on top, or you put a GoPro array with the Teradek sphere, so that you can still see what's going on, or hide a camera somewhere else, or position a camera and then end up painting it out. So monitoring is definitely still a thing. And typically it's Wi-Fi, so you go around the corner, hide behind a rock, and suddenly Wi-Fi doesn't work. Or a building, or it's concrete, you start dealing with that kind of stuff. So that's one, and the computational, the idea that with this OZO or with one of the Google systems or Jaunt that you can upload that footage to the cloud and get it back within a couple of days is extraordinary. And same with the Insta360. I mean, I think that there's the secret with the computational stitch is that it's always actually happening automatically. It's just, it ends up going somewhere else for cleanup. And they spend a couple days cleaning it up sometimes. So that's the advantage of being able to spend a couple extra dollars, whatever you were going to spend on stitching, now on cleanup and just refining that and adding whatever elements you need, moving into interactivity and having, whether it's painting in a sky, which is something we do a lot. There's every single shot is a visual effects shot. When we shot Gone, that someone was mentioning on the last panel, every single shot was motion control. Every single shot. So to take out stitching is a huge deal. And to take out stitching when the camera's moving is an order of magnitude.
And it also allows for things like rig removal, shadow removal, just straight cleanup stuff.
Or better locations.
Better locations.
Because you're even like on these cameras, there's always something down. You're always painting something out. So better to spend the money somewhere else.
I mean, I feel like they kind of covered the massive ones, and I don't need to say all the reasons why. But I guess outside of that, something that I'm actually really excited about and excited to work with as a director more is photogrammetry, because of just the advancements that are being done in that field. So photogrammetry, volumetric capture, and seeing how we can start meshing those worlds together, because now we're able to take actual live action sets and worlds and environments and start to make them interactive in a virtual space, which is, really cool.
So for people who don't know, can you explain what photogrammetry is?
Yeah, so basically for example, if I were to recreate this room in photogrammetry, I'd take a DSLR and I go through and I take several thousand photos. It's a rather large room. And then basically there's various programs that do this, but we would quote unquote kind of stitch, but recreate this room with depth. And then all of a sudden you have a 3D model of the room and you can now import that into Unity. Oh, that's another one. Especially with 360 video, Unity, which is a game engine, so that's how we make all of our interactive content, either with Unity or Unreal, but Unity is now coming out with tools that are primarily focused on 360 video, and what's great about that is it's going to change, I actually think it's going to change the way we do post in VR. Like, of course, we're always going to be painting things out, but now when we think about the VFX that we want to bring in, if we can take our 360 world, throw that into a game engine, make it into a 360 sphere, we're actually able to create VFX that have proper motion tracking in them without struggling so much just in, Metal, which is a VR plugin for Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects. So I think it's the software developments that I'm really excited about. I know this is all relative, but I think building cameras and hardware is one thing, but it's the software and the algorithm that's always the difficult part. And like people that I work with pretty closely on the 360 side is actually Google. So all of their jump cameras as well as their jump manager, it just saves massive amounts of time. All right.
Thank you. And for you, Sam, as a director.
Can you repeat the question?
Methods and technological advancements
That I'm excited about?
Yeah, or that are helping you.
The question was, what are the breakthroughs that you're excited about? What are the breakthroughs that, especially
definitely,
from you?
Yeah, definitely like having depth maps when you capture. So pretty much what you were talking about is whenever you have depth maps and in post-production, it just allows a much shorter post-production time because you don't have to have green screen for everything. You can start to figure out, like your 3D starts clicking better, everything starts working better. So I think
for
that's...
people that don't have them, could you explain a little bit?
Yeah, so when you have multiple lenses that are capturing something, you start to have like something called parallax shifts, so that you start to see, it's like when you close one eye and then open the other and things move. So based off of that movement, we can calculate something called a depth map. So I can say, not only am I gonna film you, I can film you and then say, oh, she was 8 feet away from the camera, and then he was 10 feet away from the camera, and then so on. So when you get into post-production and you start talking about putting a giant dinosaur right there, we can say, I need it to be 10 feet away, and then your depth map starts to help calculate all of that. So that kind of stuff I think is really exciting, and something I definitely want to move into. It's also something that's quite new. That's something I'm trying to do in every one of my projects, is find something new and exciting to push into. So even if it seems like a relatively straightforward project, I usually try to find, you guys know, I'm always coming to you and being like, yo, I want to do this thing. So I'm always trying to find some fun, exciting new thing just to try. Because at the end of the day, if you're not trying, if you're just going the safe route, you're going to end up doing the same thing. So I'm always just trying to say, like, let's move the camera, let's throw it on this, let's do that, let's do that. And I think the key to making all of that stuff work, which there's no guarantee it will work, is just testing. I come to you guys, we have like test days. Even though I know this stuff inside and out really well, doesn't matter. New camera, whole new setup, come test it. Take an extra day to come try it and figure it out and run it through a rough stitch or a computational stitch. Make sure that your DP and everyone from the producer on knows what they're getting and what the problems are going to be. That helps a lot.
I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, because the conversations that we would have had as this panel of even a year ago or a year and a half ago wouldn't have been around, let's experiment with depth maps. And I mean, it was on some level, but it wouldn't have been in a room like this, because we would have been talking about pain points. And I think what's great, what's fantastic, is those pain points are being eliminated. That's what sort of we all just talked about. It was kind of a great progression, because we were talking about pain points and then it went to experimentation, and that's exactly where it's going. That's exactly what's happening. Those pain points exist both in capture and then in post-production and all the way through. And as they get solved, the level of creativity and the level of experimentation and where it can all go starts to just skyrocket. And it starts to skyrocket with people who aren't necessarily, VR geeks. It starts to skyrocket with people who understand how to tell great stories, who then can tap into just these tools that work, right?
Absolutely.
Can I add one more thing? I think that's a really important point, the idea that it's not just like VR nerds. That at the end of the day, I think there's a version of this business. I think we can everyone can make judgments about, is this the future? Will it always be the future? Is it only the future? But at the end of the day, we know that the idea of shooting 360 and immersive content is a version of the future. That is happening in some way. It's not going to go away. May not be everything, but it's something that will certainly be around for a while. And as we move into this kind of like lean around 6DoF and into volumetric spaces, we know that's a thing. And I think something that I find myself always, as I mentioned earlier, kind of championing is finding ways of bringing the traditional attitudes about it and using the things that we've been doing, whether it's been in advertising or in cinema, to use those tools and to create quality pieces of content. Because when everyone's on panels all the time, what's the best piece of content out there? And I was like, well, I don't think it's been made yet. Yep. And I think there isn't a piece of VR content, and we've shot a ton of it, that quite matches the level of what a movie is or what a commercial is, even just in the 30 seconds or the minute of the thing.
So you bring up a great point, because I feel that too. And I'm going to ask this from the panel. Why do you think that there's the sense of the tone is still not there in virtual reality? Or do you think it is there already?
Sorry, say it again.
The tone, like in cinema or in film, because again, this is a new medium. Film, it took 30 years until we had it developed to its first long format, which was a great train robbery. It took some time. Same thing's happening in 360.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like 360, everyone's experimenting, everyone's trying stuff, and that's part of what makes it such a fun medium. I mean, it's a super challenging medium, but it's super fun. But I agree, I don't really think anyone's cracked something where everyone's like, oh, that's it, let's roll with that, let's move in that direction. It's still finding it's like footing, but I feel like VR initially, everyone was like, oh, is it gonna overtake cinema? And it's like, that's kind of been proven. It's like, no, it's its own separate thing. But I feel like we're still trying to figure out what that thing is. I think it works great in documentary. I haven't seen a lot of like narrative pieces that blow me away. I think it's really interesting for experiential and like gaming and interactive and like something a little more abstract. That's super interesting. I think it's finding its footing in those spaces, but it's still just kind of like awkward. Like everyone's kind of coming into it just being like, let's try this, let's try that. And sometimes it lands and you will have an experience unlike cinema or TV or anything else and it'll blow you away. But sometimes it's like, it doesn't, there's no formula yet.
Maybe that's what's exciting about it.
That's
for
why
once
I
we don't
do
have a
it,
formula.
yeah.
Like there's no algorithm for it.
Yeah, I think it's so fun. Like I still do traditional media shoots as well, and there's something about when you get on a traditional media shoot, everyone's just like boom, 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 clockwork. Like, okay, I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna put that light there. Boom, boom. And then you get on a 360 shoot, and everyone's like, "Where are you gonna hide?" Like, I don't know. Like, it's just like, you know, we just kind of get together and we're like figuring it out. And I think that's a blast. Not that we're like, you know, we don't know what we're doing, but you know, it just takes a lot of experience and it takes a lot of people and knowledge to like try to work through this.
I think one of the really important things too is that VR itself is not a style of content. You're not creating something in VR and that's your style of content. VR is a delivery mechanism for a type of content. So if you think of a VR headset as a TV or a theater, that's a delivery mechanism. And there are different types of content that fit within that sphere, right? So there are documentaries, there are educational things, there are narrative, there are whatever. But to walk into the world and go, I'm gonna create VR, that's like saying like, okay, I mean, you could create anything under the fucking sun, just because it's, you know, and so what we're seeing, I think, is like these styles that are emerging within content creators, both within content creators, I talk about this a lot, content creator styles are emerging, but also viewing habits are emerging, and the public is starting to understand, I like this kind of content, I like this style of content versus VR is all or VR is nothing. So for example, I like really fast editing, or I don't like really fast editing. I want to sit and explore my world. I like things to be happening all the way around me like an action film, or I fucking hate that and I want the content creator to guide me through the space as if I'm naturally looking around the room rather than making me like whip my neck around the whole time. These are like, you know, sort of technical style choices, and then there's also narrative and content style choices from comedy to horror to whatever that exists across all of our media that have to sort of be applied to this media as well. So I think like that's crystallizing. For a while it's just been, you're making VR. And that's like not a statement you can make.
Well, and I also think it's like looking at right now a lot of quote unquote VR pieces that do well, they're festival pieces. They were designed to go the festival circuit. They were designed to win these festival routes. And I think as we're exploring and experimenting, it's balancing how can I make content that's provocative and innovative and pushes the technology forward. And those are oftentimes the pieces that go to the festivals. But those pieces of content don't necessarily appeal to a mass audience. And that's kind of also what we need to start figuring out is like, okay, not everyone's going to enjoy that festival piece, but it's like a piece like Jeff's piece. More people are going to actually enjoy and want to see the Hulu doc that he did on Major Lazer. It's kind of like I directed a VR music video for this musician named Banks. Like the intention for that piece isn't to win a festival, but it was how can I use production design, aesthetic, and really honing in on, you know, solidifying what my aesthetic is in VR and push that to her entire, you know, multi-million fan platform. Like that's the targeted audience. And I think we're starting to pick and pull things that are working from different pieces. And that's kind of what it is. It's like no one, in all honesty, none of us have any idea what the fuck we're doing and how we're telling stories. Like we don't. Like every doc is this, so many VR docs that you watch. Look at what Riot, RYOT, I think it was in 2014 or 13, they did a VR documentary in Nepal. Watch Riot's progression as a company for about the next year and every piece of content that they did. Every single freaking VR doc that I've seen almost matches that exact style. of like, ooh, drone shot, nice voiceover, we're going to place a camera in a village, and you know, like it's really interesting to see. And so what I think we need is more people going, okay, like that was cool, but I would do this and this different, and actually executing on that. Yeah, that's my little rant.
I think a lot of it has to do with language conventions. You go back to D.W. Griffith, and he came up with this thing called a close-up, right? And when he did it, audiences freaked out. They lost their minds. They thought he'd cut their heads off. So we're dealing with similar things. And what's really interesting from a language standpoint, we have a different reel that's not just a VFX breakdown reel, but we have pieces of content next to each other. And the instinct, the first time you go out to do a VR project, is to have somebody jump out of a hot air balloon or something, right? Like some big grand POV thing. And what's interesting, we were at NAB last year and we were showing this reel, and over and over and over and over again, the piece of content that got the most comments was a piece called The Recruit, where this woman is sitting across the table from you and she's looking you right in the eye and you're in the room with her. And that's it. And stuff happens in the background and the environment changes and all of a sudden you're floating out over a building. But what matters is that you're having a personal experience one-on-one with another human being in a virtual world. And it's the intimacy of it. And that's kind of the magic of VR that takes a little bit of experience to learn, is that it's the intimacy of the environment that's different than sitting in a theater or even sitting on your couch at home. You're actually sitting with the person who's having a conversation with you, and that's different.
Also, as each project moves, everything we've done, everything that anybody does, kind of you build on it, the next thing's better and different and more complicated and maybe more expensive. But I think that there's so many other things besides moving the camera, so many things other than all the kind of specific camera-related things, that is a way of infusing the immersive world, which is a growing space, with other technologies. And some of that has to do with interactivity, like Marcy mentioned in the last panel about reusing VFX assets and kind of rewriting the narrative of how content gets made. I think personally, I think that there's a way of kind of creating diversity in the people who are telling those stories and kind of rewriting that, kind of rewriting who geographically is telling stories and kind of democratizing that a little more. Another piece of it is how we're utilizing data. You know, about a month ago, YouTube released a kind of quiet tool set that allowed you to heat map how pieces of content are being consumed. And so now as you're watching how multiple people, you're basically taking like a Nielsen data set from what people are watching, and you can start activating that. Like there are ways of kind of bringing some other aspects that are not just camera related, and this might be taboo to say, that push the business forward in a even more strategic way.
I'm really excited. I don't know about you guys on the panel, but I'm really excited about AR too, and where sort of when we, this whole sort of revolution started in the VR space, and it quickly moved to AR and MR and XR and whatever the fuck you want to call it. But bringing these assets alive in your world and being able to interact with them, what really changed it for me, I think, was watching the AR kit demos that Apple released, and all of a sudden I realized that in September, we're all going to be able to play with AR, everyone, who has an Apple device pretty much, and if you have one of the newer ones, it'll go even deeper. And if you look at some of these AR kit demos where they're bringing a portal, I showed this to Jen the other night, where you're bringing a portal into the room and you walk through the portal in your physical space, and now you have walked into a live performance or a 3D CGI world, and when you turn around, you see the portal, and Michael's standing there because he's in the fucking, it's like what that does to storytelling, it just kind of like takes your brain and, rips it open. And, and it can be overwhelming in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's like, look at this. We get to, when you talk about telling a story where you get to interact with people and you get to really change people's perception of reality and have an experience that lives with them like over a long period of time and can actually, impact their emotional state. That's what these tool sets are going to allow us to do. Beyond the educational and how far is it to the Eiffel Tower and that sort of shit that will happen with AR as well.
Also, just Tim made a comment about how VR is an intimate medium, and it totally is. I just wanted to say, intimacy in VR is not synonymous to how close can I get to the camera. That's not it. That is not the move. Just had to throw that out there.
John, should we save some Q&A?
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys have any questions? Start with you.
Thanks all of you for coming here and sharing all these insights. As a producer that's always looking for really interesting ways of telling a story, my head's spinning already. My head's been ripped open. Okay, and I'm not even sure what I'm hearing. But my question is, what is the absolute best use of narrative in VR that you've seen, and for any of you? Because I'm seeing that as like the thing that's a little bit hard to accomplish, but I'd kind of like to hear examples of what's actually worked that isn't a travelogue, that is actually telling a story.
I personally, I'll start that. I haven't seen anything great. I've seen a lot of experiments that are really interesting. I think Adam Costco and his knives piece did a really great job of telling a story through editing that worked really, really well. It's scratching the surface. I think Dear Angelica had a great story. That was Oculus Story Studio, but I think they pushed on the empathy button too hard and it didn't work for me.
I think the Mr. Robot piece, although it was like slow and maybe not everyone's type of thing, I think they were doing something interesting. Have you seen that one? Okay. I think they were doing something interesting. They weren't trying to tell a big story. They were just telling like a story in a single room with a person, and the camera movement kind of supported the story. Like, it was just well thought out. It had an interesting approach to it, but still, for me, like not perfect.
From Felix and Paul Studios, there's a piece called Miyubi. It's a 40-minute narrative VR experience where you are watching from the perspective of a robot. And what I thought was really interesting out of that piece, there were parts of the story that I would have changed, but the 40 minutes goes by really fast. I was really skeptical going into the headset, but the way they told the narrative and the way they made you a part of the story and giving you a false sense of agency over the story really made it move quickly. And I think another thing with narrative too that we have to take into consideration is I don't necessarily think narrative in VR is going to be the exact same as narrative in film and television. One of my personal favorite pieces that came out in like 2014, again from Felix and Paul Studios, is Strangers. And all it is you are sitting on this chair and you're watching someone play the piano. And the reason why that was such a powerful piece for me was because not only, you hear people talk about presence all the time, but I felt so present there that my mind crafted the narrative. And it's every time I've gone into that piece, I've had a different experience. Like the first time it was like, we're ex-lovers that just spent the night together and now it's the regretful morning and it's like, I still love you, but you don't love me. And your brain just like, and I think that's the powerful thing with VR is we can tell our stories. We build these worlds because that's what we're doing. We are world building from ground up. Every single thing that you see in a 360 video, whether it's CG or live action, should have been intentionally and thoughtfully thought out. That's why like looking at the work that Disney Imagineers do is incredible. They're all like, they get down to like the nitty gritty of the tablecloth. And I think in VR production, we have to get down to that same nitty gritty. And we allow people to put themselves in the story and fill the story themselves, and then they learn something themselves.
I just want to follow up on that with a quick statement about, I think one of the reasons why there isn't a great narrative product out there is, first of all, I personally think that it sort of needs to be interactive in the space because you shot a bunch of stuff and you're kind of on a path and it feels like you want to be off that path. I want to do something different. And so I think the interactivity lends a lot to narrative. But a big problem is that so much of the bigger projects that we've done have been with studios and a studio marketing division, and the studio marketing division isn't allowed to tell a unique story. It has to be derivative of the original property. And that's been a huge hang-up.
Michael, we got a question and a
Sure.
microphone.
Hi, I'm loving this. Thank you so much. But as a producer, I'm already moving on to how am I going to budget this. So I have so many questions. One of them is, can you guys talk about some of the items that you did not budget for as you were learning how to do this that you might be able to give us some advice on? And then where can we go to learn more about this? I'm thinking what are the best NLEs, and how are these cameras going to do when I take them to the Amazon and extreme environments, and but mostly, what are some budgeting line items that as producers we need to immediately think about asking when we're talking to production companies about how to put a product together?
Sounds like the oh shit moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you start with the people who are the experts in the space. Like I said earlier, it's a very collaborative space right now. There are a lot of people who are working within very specific niches of the space, and you have to go to them. You have to, even within our own building, I'll go sit down with my supervisors and say, let's break this thing down together, because as a producer, I know what those pieces are. How long are they going to take? What's the bid point for each of these things? And it's different. It's a different animal. So you kind of have to go to the experts at each phase, whether it's production side, post-production, visual effects, 3D conversion. One of the surprises that showed up on one of several of our shows, actually, if you end up shooting with cameras that aren't gen-locked and you're shooting native stereo, you can get subframe drift. So you can have the left eye a half a frame slower than the right eye, which feels wrong, but you can't really tell. So those sorts of questions, like, hey, calling back the client, would you like to pay to fix this? It feels wrong. And those are the questions. Those are the surprises on our end from the post side.
And I think when you get your project, you have your creative and you have your script, it is immediately going through and for you highlighting how many moving shots is my director DP looking at doing? What camera systems are they looking at using? Like, and you have to ask yourselves, how much of this are we shooting stereo? How much of this are we shooting mono? Are we delivering stereo? Because then, at least on the post side, like some of the big line items that I always have in my post-production budgets are mono to stereo conversion, and that's always a really good chunk of money, like usually anywhere from 10 to 20 grand minimum. And then I always have a line item for rotoscoping, because I remember it's like 2.5 years ago, we were shooting, and I don't know why we didn't anticipate that we would actually need to roto a lot of our work to clean up some of the artifacting. And then that ended up being like an unaccounted for like $15,000 line item. So those are like the two pieces that I always have in my post-production, even when I'm not sure. I'm just like, it's in there.
Yeah, there's a big chunk that sits in post, and it's kind of fluid right now because of what we've been talking about on the optical stitch side too. Like there used to be, you would definitely have a rough stitch line item and a fine stitch line item, and you might have some others in there, but that rough stitch line item now might go away, or it might convert down to something that's a tenth of what it was because you're going to pay for some bandwidth and server costs. And your fine stitch then also goes down because the optical flow is doing so well that you might need less work there. And then you can take the rest of that money and put it into things like real, paint outs or amplification of some great effect or whatever. On the production side, I've always sort of looked at it, at least over the last year and a half, that my production budget is going to sit somewhere around 20 to 30% higher for a VR shoot than it would for a traditional shoot. So if I'm looking at a monoscopic, single camera, or if I'm looking at stereoscopic 2-camera traditional shoot, if I kind of layer on 20 to 30% as a gut check, and then I go through and I work with my crew and I start to understand, okay, what do you need? What text do we need? What systems do we need? That's where I tend to land. Don't quote me on that because you'll probably underbid and then there you go. But that tends to be like the world.
Jeff is very efficient.
Also, I think the key is to have the conversations with post really early on. I mean, the idea of fix it in post does not apply. It will mushroom way out of control.
Way out of control.
So I think another important thing is everyone has to be kind of a generalist in this space. I mean, a lot of the projects that you've seen, the big ticket things, I won't mention them, the most expensive projects out there have been shot 2 and even 3 times, where they've completely reshot the entire project to the tune of $8 to $12 million. It's like, that's a thing. And so one last thing I was going to say is that everyone kind of has to be a generalist. The extent that a lot of times I will, recommend a post house, or I will, recommend someone for sound, and vice versa, because everyone, besides always working with folks, in kind of knowing everyone's assets, it's also about having kind of a global sense of what the project is going in.
And just last thing that you just totally reminded me of, as a producer, like I'm producing and directing, I think like 3 VR projects right now. The first thing I did after I locked creative was I figured out who's my post house and who's my production house, and then I pulled in my key people from the post house, like whoever's supervising the post, and then the key person from the production whoever's overseeing the production, got them in a room, and we sat down and we went through the creative together. Because there may be things that you have to change creatively before you can even go to shoot. And so it's now, you're working on like this linear timeline of everyone has to work side by side at the same time. I don't know what the word for that is. Is it anonymous?
It's collaboration.
Yeah, you're collaboration.
Hi, Mike.
One mic here, and then
I wanted to talk about montage for a minute. It seems there are innate, I guess, issues with editing in the headset world. Are there any rules that you've found through experience that you'd like to share, like things you don't want to do, or things that really work?
Well, if there were any rules, I think they've all broken by now.
From an editing perspective?
Yeah, let me ask you this. Are you talking about like where you have multiple images on screen at once, like wrapping around? Just like cut, cut.
Well, you know, cutting to a close-up is an easy way to activate a long scene, for instance. You can't do that now.
Right.
So, you know,
so I would say
what works and what really doesn't work. You know?
Yeah. I would say this is like one of those times where you should know your distribution first. If it's a 360 delivery, meaning just like going to be posted on Facebook or it's going to be seen on a screen, you can kind of get away with a lot. Because I can't remember what it was, but like the numbers on Facebook of the amount of people who actually move and look around, it's very low. So you need to be thinking about that. And so when if you're gonna cut, and just keep your point of interest between each shot, always have a point of interest. If you're gonna cut from one person and then to the next, put them there and then there. Don't put them there and then over here, you know? And because a lot of people are just gonna be watching it like a flat, normal thing. So it's just gonna go boom, boom, boom. In a headset, totally different. You're gonna be so disoriented and it's gonna be a nightmare, so.
Speak to their headset, actually.
Oh, in the headset? It depends. Like the knives thing that like clever editing to where it's like, I see that in a wide shot and then I go to it in a close, and then there's ways to guide the eye and make the brain keep up with the montage and go really fast. But you really need to pre-plan that and make sure you know you're thinking about that point of interest that I talked about, where you know you can predict what someone's looking at, and it just helps them understand it.
This starts to go down that really, really sort of art. There's an art to it. There's a feel. There's a tone that you start to establish working on these projects, and it permeates when you're talking about like the montage and pacing and how to get somebody, especially in a headset, from point A to point B to the next cut. That starts to happen in what I was calling storyboarding or in pre-planning, where now all of a sudden my subject has crossed the frame, and I'm going to want a cut to happen here, and now I need to pick that subject up where the person was hopefully looking, if I capture their attention the right way, and then take the subject somewhere else. And so Jessica Brillhart from Google has a great Medium post, a series of Medium posts around how linear editing in a linear timeline is so vastly different than what we're trying to do in a headset, where we're stacking worlds on top of each other, and then you're taking these points of interest within each world that gets stacked and applying it so that they connect dots. We don't have a tool set for that right now, so we're all editing in Premiere or Final Cut. I mean, you know, usually Premiere at this point, and you're just trying things and using some of those principles that you felt, and then just putting a headset on and going like what worked and what didn't. Or a lot of the time I'm sitting there with my editor with my headset on, and he's editing in real time, and I'm going like, that feels great, that feels terrible. What's really interesting is you'll look at a flat frame, the equirectangulars that you saw up there, which is basically the 360 world unwrapped. When you're editing, you're usually editing in that unwrapped world. There are some new tools to allow for that to not happen, but usually, you're just like roughing it together in that unwrapped world. And you're like, this feels great. And then you put it in the headset and you're like, this is fucking terrible. And it's the things that you thought needed to play long actually should play short, and the things that you felt needed to play short should play long. And it just, like, it's completely upside down. And so then that's where the feel and the artistry and the experience comes in, because you start to understand how all this stuff plays together.
I'm gonna go, you got some more comments?
Just one quick comment on that. Along those lines, we find that generally the takes are much longer in the headset. As little movement as possible, especially lateral movement like this, you can't fix that in the compositing programs, and that's what makes people sick. And if you have the budget for it, pre-visit so you can pop it in the headset before you ever shoot it, and you know what works. The more, I mean, we said the 6 different ways up here today, but the more that you can plan for this thing before you actually get on set, the better shape you're going to be in.
Yeah, so just like get like a Ricoh Theta, get like a cheap 360 camera, and just go shoot your own boards. Like, just stage them, fake them, and then try it out yourself. That's a great way to board and a great way to previs.
I know that there are a bazillion more questions. I'm also conscious of, she's like, no, just one more. Well, when you got the microphone, I've got lunch. So what I'm going to do is a quick set of housekeeping. You're going to get to chat with those nice people. I haven't heard enough about audio today. I just want to say more audio, more. Okay.
I was gonna bring up the
audio.
audio.
See, he was going to bring up audio. I knew that's where he was going. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do. Nobody get excited yet. Lunch is being served outside. That doorway goes outside. Do not run over the audio guy. He's a nice audio guy. He's been serving us. Do not run him over. Lunch is outside. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to remove all of these chairs. So you can either head out to lunch now, but if your brain processes damn, that's a lot of people, they're all going to be in line, that's fine, because you can stay and talk to these nice gentlemen. You can also go and grab lunch. Is that? Really? Thank you, Jen. Always keeping me honest. Always keeping me honest.
Literally gonna kill you.
Yes, I know. Well, I was just going to make sure that Jen wasn't up there. She's going to get
That's why my wheel wasn't up there.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen. You can talk to them. You can go out and grab lunch. We're going to remove all these chairs. So the only thing I ask is when you get up, do not have a butt-in chair. Now, did I say you could leave yet? I didn't think so. Michael, I want you to grab the mic for a second and tell people the different stations and things that we've got here when they come back, so they have some idea of the navigation, okay? Give us a quick rundown of what we got here.
So as soon as you guys finish your lovely lunch, come back inside. We'll have tech stations. We'll have tech stations with Jaunt, OZO, all the cameras that we just talked about earlier. You'll get hands-on, and you can ask questions about it. Some of them we're going to try to answer. Some of them we won't. But you'll walk away with a lot more information than before.
What's that big green room over there?
I don't know. It's been there. No, that's our volumetric capture with Uncorporeal. So Carlos is here from Uncorporeal. He'll answer a lot of your questions about this new method of capturing spatialized volumetric, as well as here 360 that's doing their spatialized audio.
Right, where are the Here 360 guys?
They're going to be right here.
Right.
And we have our live OZO system here. So you guys can see how real production happens in live streaming for broadcast.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen.
But enjoy your lunch, guys. Thank you.
You can now start moving towards lunch or ask questions.